Chapter 481. It had to be said that right now, Yi Xian was extremely irascible. He absolutely would not allow anyone to harm Yi Ling, including himself. In his rage, Yi Xian forcibly suppressed the corrosion of that power. His mind became clearer and clearer. However, he was still in a bit of a difficult situation. Because that power was too strong. It was so strong that he could not control it right now. Yi Xian looked up into the sky. The next moment, he turned into a gray sword light and shot into the sky. Slaughter. He had to vent this power. Otherwise, this power would sooner or later devour him. As the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield joined forces, the battle situation gradually changed. Because right now, no one could stop Yi Xian and Wuxia. The two were practically invincible, and the two evil beasts were growing stronger as they fought. The never-ending Starfield and the Moke clan began to gain the upper hand. In the void, a white light suddenly dissipated. The painter and the great sovereign appeared in the sky. However, at this moment, the great sovereign's face was pale and he was extremely weak. The great sovereign stared at the distant painter. I underestimated you. Underestimated. Only now did he realize that this artist's strength was much greater than he had expected. Because in his opinion, he and the painter were equally matched. Unfortunately, after a round of fighting, he had been completely defeated. In the distance, the painter walked towards the great sovereign. You underestimated the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield. The great sovereign glanced down. At this moment, the never-ending Starfield and the Moke clan had begun to counterattack. The situation was extremely unfavorable for the Sky River Starfield and the Foreignland Starfield. Especially Wuxia, Yi Xian, and the others. Besides the experts of the older generation, everyone else couldn't even last a single round in front of these two people. At this moment, the painter raised her jade-like hand and a powerful force instantly enveloped the great sovereign. The great sovereign looked up at the painter and grinned. Do you think you can win? The painter frowned slightly. The great sovereign said again, you will never know who will attack you this time. The painter muttered to herself. The next moment, she clenched her jade-like hand. Boom! The great sovereign directly turned into nothingness. She raised her head to look at the sky, and in the next instant, she waved her jade-like hands, and a black brush tore through the sky. In the next instant, countless screams rang out. Retreat! Suddenly, a voice resounded in the sky. Soon, the experts of the Milky Way star region and the foreign domain began to retreat, and before long, they had retreated to the sky above the clouds. In the air, the celestial venerate and endless heaven appeared before everyone again. Wei Yang Tian had his hands behind his back, his face pale, while the heavenly lord was expressionless. From the outside, he did not seem to be injured. At this moment, Painter appeared beside endless heaven. The painter looked at the Empyrean. It's over. The Empyrean glanced at the painter and faintly smiled. No, this is just the beginning. The painter said softly, is that so? The celestial venerable said softly, you've underestimated the importance of that treasure. As he spoke, he turned to look at the horizon. We've already given it our all. Are you still not going to act? Hearing the Sky Sovereign's words, unending sky, and the painter frowned. Everyone looked in the direction the celestial venerable was looking at. Soon, the space there split open, and an old man in purple robes walked out. The purple-robed old man wore a square official hat and held a long purple token in his right hand. On his left shoulder, there were two words, order. Seeing the purple-robed old man, the painter immediately frowned. Star Order Enforcer. The universe was vast and boundless, with countless star regions. In these star regions, there was a group of people who protected the universe and maintained its order. These people were the Star Order. Enforcers. The most mysterious and powerful group of people in the vast universe. Seeing the old man appear, the painter and Endless Heaven understood that the foreign domain and the Milky Way star region were just pawns. The Star Order Enforcer was the true mastermind. In the air, the purple-robed old man looked at the painter and unending sky. This Yi Xian is the person we want. The painter looked at the purple-robed old man. Your goal is not just Yi Xian. What I don't understand is that your goal is only Yi Xian. Why are you attacking the never-ending star region? The purple-robed old man said calmly, don't the never-ending star region and the Moke clan know? The painter looked at Unending Sky. Unending Sky said calmly, they once contacted us and demanded that the never-ending star region pay tribute to them every 5 years. I refused. The hunchbacked old man from the Moke clan walked over. The Moke clan also refused. The painter nodded slightly. I understand. In the air, the purple-robed old man glanced at the painter and the other two. Surrender, and you will be spared. Surrender? Unending Sky sneered. You want me to surrender? Who do you think you are? Next to Unending Sky, the hunchbacked old man chuckled. Surrender? The Moke clan has never knelt to anyone since our ancestors. In the air, the purple-robed old man's expression was cold. You have a death wish. As soon as he finished speaking, he tapped the token in his right hand. Instantly, a huge stone platform appeared in front of him. There were nearly 100 teleportation arrays on the stone platform. Soon, the teleportation arrays began to tremble, as if something was about to come out. In the air, the purple-robed old man looked down at Unending Sky and the others. Finally, his gaze landed on Yi Xian. At that moment, Yi Xian's eyes were tightly shut, and his body trembled uncontrollably. Suppress. He was forcefully suppressing the Moke power in his body and the desire to kill. As if sensing the purple-robed old man's gaze, Yi Xian looked up at him. The next moment, an illusory Xiao Ta appeared between his brows. When they saw the illusory pagoda, the expressions on the faces of all the spectators changed. A treasure. The purple-robed old man stared at the Xiao Ta. Yi Xian suddenly grinned. Do you want it? The purple-robed old man narrowed his eyes. At that moment, Yi Xian said, I'm not giving it to you. Everyone, the purple-robed old man looked at Yi Xian, his eyes gradually turning cold. Don't worry, I'll get it myself. At that moment, Yi Xian raised his sword and charged at the purple-robed old man. The purple-robed old man looked at Yi Xian expressionlessly. In the air, a hand suddenly pressed down on Yi Xian's shoulder. Painter. Painter looked at Yi Xian. Can you beat him? Yi Xian's voice trembled. I don't know. Painter's mouth twitched. If you don't know, why are you still going? Yi Xian was confused. Do I have to go? Painter, at that moment, the purple-robed old man suddenly looked at the Celestial Venerate and the others. We only want that treasure. The rest belongs to your Sky River sector and the foreign sector. The Celestial Venerate was silent. The purple-robed old man said calmly, that treasure is supreme. Even if I give it to you, you can't keep it. Understand? The Celestial Venerate said in a low voice, what is it? Why? The purple-robed old man interrupted the Celestial Venerate. The more you know, the faster you die. The Celestial Venerate glanced at the purple-robed old man and said no more. At that moment, not far away, Yi Xian suddenly said, why wait for them to come? Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, we can kill them before they come. Next to Yi Xian, Baldy said softly, that makes sense. Painter looked at Midnight Sky, who said calmly, kill. Kill. As soon as she finished speaking, she and Master Painter rushed out. The hunchbacked old man also rushed out. Behind the three, the Moke clan and the Never-Ending Sector's powerhouses also rushed out. In the air, the purple-robed old man frowned. The next moment, he looked at Yan Sheng and the Great Sovereign. "Stop them." The Great Sovereign hesitated, then directly rushed toward Midnight Sky. As for the gods' wizards, they started to target Painter. As for the hunchbacked old man, he was stopped by a shadow. This shadow was the expert who had fought with him before. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Destroy the formation." As his voice faded, a flying sword pierced through the air. It was extremely fast and arrived before the stone platform in an instant. However, just as it was about to slash at the stone platform, a hand suddenly grabbed the sword light. It was the purple-robed old man's hand. The purple-robed old man clenched his fist lightly. Boom! The sword light shattered. The purple-robed old man looked down at Yi Xian, and then he appeared in front of Yi Xian without any warning. His right hand grabbed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian instantly felt like his entire body had been frozen in place. Right at that moment, a white shadow appeared in front of him. It was Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai punched, but the purple-robed old man didn't stop there. He pressed his hand against Mr. Bai's fist. Rumble. A powerful force suddenly swept out, and Yi Xian, who was behind Mr. White, was suddenly shaken to the point of retreating repeatedly. Meanwhile, a flying sword silently appeared at the purple-robed old man's throat. The purple-robed old man frowned slightly. His figure shook, and the flying sword slashed through the air. However, it slashed through the air, and he was already behind Mr. Bai. He didn't attack Mr. Bai. Instead, he grabbed at Yi Xian. He was extremely fast. Yi Xian couldn't dodge because the purple-robed old man was too fast. He held the Moke sword with both hands and slashed forward. Hiss! A dark gray sword light slashed down viciously. Boom! The ray of sword light instantly shattered, but the purple-robed old man was pushed back by around 3 m. He glanced at his palm, and then at Yi Xian with a frown. "Your sword has some skill." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, a powerful force assaulted him from behind. The purple-robed old man frowned slightly, and then he turned around and slammed his fist forward. It was a very ordinary punch, but it made Mr. Bai retreat by 300 m. As soon as Mr. Bai stopped, the space around him shattered and transformed into pitch-black darkness. The purple-robed old man glanced at Mr. Bai. "I underestimated you. But I don't have time to deal with you now." As he spoke, he turned around to look at Yi Xian, and then he shot explosively towards Yi Xian. He was so fast that Yi Xian couldn't even see him. Yi Xian stomped his right foot against the ground and soared into the air. At the same time, he slashed down with his sword in both hands. However, his sword was stopped by a hand. The purple-robed old man's hand. The purple-robed old man looked at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. He was about to attack when a shadow suddenly flashed to his side, and then a fist smashed towards his head. The purple-robed old man frowned slightly and blocked with his left hand. Bang! The powerful force pushed the purple-robed old man back by around 3 m, but he didn't stop. Numerous flying swords slashed towards him. Bang! The purple-robed old man retreated by another few meters. Meanwhile, there was another person by Yi Xian's side. Mo Xia. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian. "I'll fight him in close combat. You use your flying swords. Any problems?" Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "Kill him." Chapter 482. As Yi Xian's voice faded, Mo Xia charged forward. Mo Xia's speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the purple-robed old man. The purple-robed old man was expressionless. When Mo Xia punched at him, his body suddenly became illusory. Chi. Mo Xia's punch hit empty air. Mo Xia's expression changed slightly. He turned around, but at this moment, a palm imprinted on his chest. Pung! Mo Xia's entire body flew back. However, almost at the same moment Mo Xia flew back, a flying sword quietly appeared behind the purple-robed old man. The purple-robed old man turned around, and with a shake of his body, the flying sword appeared behind him. The purple-robed old man looked at Yi Xian and clenched his fist. A powerful force instantly enveloped Yi Xian. Chop! Yi Xian's voice suddenly rang out. Immediately, a sword light tore down in front of Yi Xian. The purple-robed old man's force was directly torn open by Yi Xian's sword. The purple-robed old man squinted his eyes and was about to attack again. However, Mo Xia suddenly appeared behind him. The purple-robed old man frowned slightly. He turned around and punched out. Mo Xia also punched out. Force against force. Rumble. Mo Xia's entire body was instantly blasted hundreds of meters away by the purple-robed old man's fist. However, at this moment, several flying swords suddenly slashed at the purple-robed old man. However, the purple-robed old man's body instantly became illusory. The flying swords seemed to have slashed at the air, and had no effect at all. At this moment, the purple-robed old man had already appeared in front of Yi Xian. He was about to attack when Yi Xian's eyes suddenly opened, and a wave of sword light vibrated out. The purple-robed old man frowned slightly, and his arm blocked in front of him. Rumble! Rumble! The purple-robed old man retreated continuously. This time, he retreated a full 30 meters. After he stopped, he glanced at his arm. His arm was covered in sword scars. The purple-robed old man's face darkened. He looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak, but behind him, an afterimage was rapidly flying towards him. Mo Xia. The purple-robed old man turned around and slapped down. Rumble. Space instantly ruptured. Mo Xia, who had just arrived in front of the purple-robed elder, was knocked flying. Almost at the same time, he turned around and chopped down with his palm. Chi. A wave of sword light was directly shattered by him. The violet-robed old man gazed at Yi Xian from afar, and he was just about to attack once more when a series of explosions suddenly resounded from the distant horizon. The purple-robed elder turned around and saw Yan Sheng and the others retreating in the sky. Moreover, there were only 2 divine wizards left. The old man frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene. He immediately withdrew his gaze and looked at Yi Xian while slowly clenching his right hand. He had to end the battle quickly. The purple-robed elder suddenly disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. He was about to make a move when a white figure suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, the purple-robed old man retreated several dozen zhang. This white figure was none other than Endless Heaven. Endless Sky looked coldly at the purple-robed elder. You like bullying the weak so much? The purple-robed elder stared coldly at Endless Sky. You will pay a painful price for your stubbornness. Endless Sky sneered. Is that so? As she spoke, she turned to look at Yi Xian. Go break that formation. Yi Xian nodded and charged towards the stone platform in the sky. The purple-robed elder frowned slightly. Stop him. As soon as he finished speaking, several black shadows suddenly dashed down toward Yi Xian. Yi Xian was just about to attack when Mo Xia suddenly appeared in front of him. Mo Xia glanced at the black figures. You go, I'll deal with them. Yi Xian nodded slightly and stomped his right foot. He transformed into a sword light and shot towards the horizon. The Black Shadow warriors were about to stop Yi Xian, but at this moment, Mo Xia suddenly appeared in front of them and slapped his hands forward. Rumble. The space before him rippled like a wave. Those black figures that were about to chase after Yi Xian were all stopped. The leading black figure said solemnly, "Deal with this person first." The moment he finished speaking, he charged towards Mo Xia. Mo Xia clenched his right hand. In the next moment, he stomped his right foot and charged straight over. At this moment, Yi Xian had already arrived before the stone platform. There were nearly 100 teleportation formations on the stone platform. The teleportation formations were shaking violently. Clearly, something was being teleported. Yi Xian wielded his sword and slashed forward. A ray of sword light flew out. Just as the ray of sword light was about to slash the teleportation formation, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of the sword light and pointed a finger. Rumble. The sword light shattered. However, at this moment, his expression suddenly changed because numerous flying swords were already standing on the teleportation formations. Rumble. On the teleportation platforms, the teleportation formations began to crumble one after another. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. He suddenly disappeared. Rumble. Everywhere the middle-aged man passed, space trembled violently. It was an extremely shocking sight. Yi Xian held the Mo Ku sword with both hands. At this moment, countless strands of Mo Ku energy converged madly into his body. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward and slashed down with his sword. Hiss. Space shattered as the sword passed. Rumble. Yi Xian's attack blasted the middle-aged man back. Yi Xian didn't pursue the middle-aged man, and he just pressed his fingers together and pointed towards the left instead. A few rays of light slashed towards the teleportation formations, and it didn't take long for the teleportation formations to be destroyed. The middle-aged man's expression became extremely unsightly when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, the violet-robed old man who was fighting Wei Yang Tian had stopped as well. Retreat. Meanwhile, a voice resounded abruptly, and it didn't take long for the experts of the Foreign Territory and Sky River region to start retreating, and they retreated into the starry sky. Wei Yang Tian was about to pursue them when Master Painter stopped her. Wei Yang Tian frowned slightly. "Why aren't you following up on your victory?" Master Painter shook his head. "Look down below." Wei Yang Tian looked down. At this moment, the ground below was covered in corpses. There were experts from the Foreign Territory and Sky River region, and there were also experts from the Moke clan and Neverending Starfield. As for the remaining experts from the Moke clan and Neverending Starfield, most of them were heavily injured. They were utterly unable to continue fighting. Wei Yang Tian fell silent. Master Painter spoke softly, "Recuperate for a while." Wei Yang Tian spoke solemnly, "They'll make a comeback. At that time, they'll be even stronger." Master Painter said, "We can make preparations for that as well, right?" Wei Yang Tian fell silent. The violet-robed old man looked down at Wei Yang Tian and the others. "Wei Yang Tian, it'll be the end of all of you when we return." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. On the other hand, the armies of the Foreign Territory and Sky River region retreated successively. The experts of the Moke clan and Neverending Starfield heaved sighs of relief when they saw the experts of Sky River region and the Foreign Territory retreat. They heaved huge sighs of relief. They weren't afraid of death, but they wanted to live. At that moment, Master Painter, Wei Yang Tian, and the hunchbacked old man suddenly looked up at the starry sky. At that moment, a huge starry web enveloped the entire galaxy above Burial Great Wall. Seeing this, Wei Yang Tian frowned slightly and was about to attack. Master Painter shook her head. "Let them set up the array." The hunchbacked old man said softly, "Yes, unless we give up on Neverending Starfield, it's meaningless." After a moment of silence, Wei Yang Tian turned to look at everyone present. "Heal." As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished. Master Painter looked at the hunchbacked old man and said softly, "Gentleman Mo, let's have a chat." The hunchbacked old man called Gentleman Mo hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Let's chat." Master Painter nodded slightly. "Very well." Soon, the experts of the Moke clan and Neverending Starfield returned to their respective places. However, the atmosphere had become slightly strange. Before this, they were all mortal enemies. But just now, they had joined forces against the enemy. Below, Mo sat on the ground. Beside him were Wuxia, Earth Fiend, and the evil Qilin. By now, they were all severely injured. Mo seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked around. "Where's Yi Xian?" Wuxia looked around. "He was just here." "Why?" Mo said softly, "Moke sword," saying that, he looked at Wuxia. "Will he not return it?" Wuxia hesitated for a moment and then said, "As the most outstanding genius of Neverending Starfield, he should return it." Mo said softly, "Probably." In the void, the purple-robed old man was expressionless. Beside him were the Sky River Starfield's heavenly venerate and the foreign divine sorcerer. At that moment, except for the purple-robed old man, the rest of the people had ugly expressions. They had suffered a crushing defeat. This time, they had been completely confident of winning, but things had turned out this way. The heavenly venerate said softly, "We underestimated them." Yansheng nodded. Indeed. They had always treated the Moke clan and Neverending Starfield seriously. That was why they had only appeared after the Neverending Starfield and Moke clan had fought to the death. But they had not expected that after the battle, their combat power would still be so strong. At that moment, the heavenly venerate looked at the purple-robed old man. "Brother Gu Yen, if we want to obtain Neverending Starfield, we must take care of Neverending Sky, Master Painter, and the ancestral patriarch of Moke clan." Saying that, he paused and then said, "Besides that, Yi Xian and Mo are also extremely monstrous. If they grow up, we must take them seriously." The purple-robed old man called Gu Yen stopped and looked at the token in his hand. After a moment, he said softly, "The higher-ups have given the order to summon the experts from the surrounding starfields. We will attack in 2 days. Prepare your people." The heavenly venerate frowned slightly. 2 days? Why the rush? The purple-robed old man said calmly, "Are we going to let them rest and recuperate?" The heavenly venerate was silent. The purple-robed old man said, "The spirit chi is drying up, and there are fewer and fewer starfields that can survive. If we do not take over Neverending Starfield, the Sky River Starfield and the foreign domain will completely dry up in a few decades and become dead starfields." The heavenly venerate said in a low voice, "If the price is too high," Gu Yen interrupted the heavenly venerate. "Price? Don't we have to pay a price to survive? We only want the treasure on Yi Xian. The rest is yours." Yansheng suddenly said, "This Yi Xian's background might not be simple. According to our investigation, there seems to be a mysterious expert behind him." Gu Yen slowly closed his eyes. "No matter how strong the expert is, he is useless in front of our planet master. P.S. I read the comments yesterday. Most of you want to read the Earth's chapters. Chapter 483. Burial Sky Great Wall, inside the stone house. As soon as Yi Xian returned to the stone house, he threw the Moke sword into the prison pagoda. In an instant, he slumped to the ground. Weakness. That was how he felt at the moment. When he held the Moke sword, he did not feel this way. Not only that, but his body was full of power. Temptation. The temptation of the Moke sword was too great. Because of this, he hurriedly threw the sword into the prison pagoda. He did not want to be enslaved by the sword. Although that feeling was really good. But he wanted to control the sword himself, not be enslaved by it. Not far from Yi Xian, Baldy and the war army were there. Seeing Yi Xian like a pile of mud, the war army said in a low voice, "Brother Yi, are you okay?" Yi Xian shook his head slightly. "I won't die yet." The war army said softly, "That's good." Saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression became somewhat complicated. "I never thought that we would join forces with the Moke clan." Baldy also said, "I didn't expect it, but if we don't join forces, everyone will die." Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, what do you think?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment and then said, "The Moke clan and we are all trying to survive." Baldy said in a low voice, "But many of our brothers died in their hands." The war army nodded. "When I think of this, I can't get over it." Yi Xian sat cross-legged and looked at the war army and Baldy. "I won't let you forget the hatred, and the Moke clan definitely won't either. But now, we have a stronger enemy." Saying that, he turned to look outside the stone house and said softly, "If we join forces, we might have a chance of survival." Hatred? He didn't know much about the enmity between the Moke clan and the never-ending Star Domain, but he knew that if they couldn't let go of this enmity, then both sides would die. In fact, he also knew that the war army and Baldy also knew this, but the two of them still couldn't let it go. Indeed, they were once mortal enemies, but now they had to work together. It was a little awkward. At this time, the war army suddenly said, "However, compared to the Moke clan, I want to kill the Sky River sector and the Foreign Realm more." Baldy nodded. "Me too." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Hurry up and heal your injuries." War army and Baldy nodded and began to heal their wounds. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and began to frantically absorb the purple origin crystals. At the same time, his mind submerged into his body. Inside the prison pagoda, the sword of Mo Ku was wandering aimlessly. Soon, it arrived at the second floor. On the second floor, Xiaoling, who was watering the spirit fruits, suddenly stopped and turned to look at the sword of Mo Ku. The sword of Mo Ku transformed into a sword beam and pierced a spirit fruit. Soon, the spirit fruit was swallowed by it. Little Ling flared up with rage when she witnessed this scene, and she swiftly slapped her palm towards the sword of Moke. The sword of Mo Ku didn't give Xiaoling any face and slashed at Xiaoling. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression changed and he was about to attack. At this time, on the top of the pagoda, the sword in the middle suddenly shook violently. The next moment, a sword beam appeared on the second floor. Boom! The sword of Mo Ku was instantly sent flying. Outside, Yi Xian was stunned. The sword at the top of the pagoda had attacked. On the second floor, Xiaoling held the sword and madly chased after the sword of Mo Ku. At first, the sword of Mo Ku didn't give up and fought back. But soon, it began to flee, because when it clashed with the sword in Xiaoling's hand, it cracked. If Xiaoling had used just a little more strength, it would have shattered. Run! The sword of Mo Ku fled madly in the prison pagoda while Xiaoling chased after it. But she was too slow and couldn't catch up to the sword of Mo Ku. However, Xiaoling had no intention of giving up. She held the sword and madly chased after the sword of Mo Ku. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He collected his thoughts and focused on healing. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian got up and left the stone house. He walked to the side of the city wall. Below the wall, some people were cleaning up the battlefield. There were many corpses. The smell of blood was everywhere. At this moment, a woman walked to Yi Xian's side. It was the painter. The painter looked at the corpses below and said softly, "What do you think?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment and then said, "The world is cruel." The painter looked at Yi Xian. "What else?" Yi Xian said softly, "War is cruel." The painter looked at the corpses below. "It is cruel." In this chaotic world, human life is always so worthless. Yi Xian looked at the painter. What are you trying to say, senior? The painter looked straight at Yi Xian. Stop the war. Yi Xian shook his head. It's difficult. The painter said softly, it is difficult. All these years, I've been dealing with the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield, but it's useless. Yi Xian said, in my opinion, only great strength can stop the war. The painter looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. Senior is very strong. Very strong. But what if Senior is 10 times or 100 times stronger than you are now? At that time, Senior can stop the war with a single word. The painter smiled. Your words are not without reason. Indeed, I can kill many people and even save many, but I can't stop this person's greed and evil. As she spoke, she looked up at the horizon. At this moment, the horizon was covered by an enormous net of stars. The painter said softly, they won't let you go. Yi Xian said, I know. The painter said, when the war begins, never-ending, and I will definitely be delayed. At that time, how will you protect yourself? Yi Xian fell silent. The painter looked at Yi Xian. You have two choices now. 1. Hand over that treasure and divert this disaster away. 2. Flee. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. There's nothing I can do. The painter asked, why? Yi Xian said, first, it's not that I don't want to hand over this treasure, but this treasure is connected to my mind. Unless it leaves voluntarily, I can't do anything to it. Nothing. As he said, this prison pagoda was not something he could control. At least, he couldn't remove it. Also, the second floor god had once told him that the prison pagoda followed him because of the plain-dressed woman. In short, he was very aggrieved. The painter glanced at Yi Xian. Since you can't hand over the treasure, why don't you flee? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Can I flee? The painter said softly, that's true. You are their primary target. No matter where you flee, they won't let you go. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Yes. Anyone can flee, but I can't. If I stay here and follow you, I might have a chance of survival. Saying this, he paused and said, if you are afraid that I will implicate you, I can leave. The painter smiled. Why would we? If you leave, they will still not let the never-ending star domain go. If you stay here, you will be of great help to us, won't you? Yi Xian smiled faintly and looked up at the horizon. The painter said, I have to go somewhere else. You stay here and help Mr. Bai, help him persuade Wei Yang. She is straightforward and hot-tempered. She will easily do something extreme. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. The painter turned and left. At that moment, the painter suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Can I go inside? Yi Xian was stunned. Inside? The painter knew about the prison pagoda? The painter smiled and said, your body has its own space, right? Yi Xian nodded. Forgive me for being blunt, but you'd better not go in. The painter asked, why? Yi Xian hesitated and said, it's dangerous. He knew that the painter was very powerful, far more powerful than he imagined. However, his intuition told him that the fifth floor was even more powerful. Most importantly, if the painter entered and fought with the fifth floor, he would be the unlucky one. The painter thought and said, after this is over, if we are all alive, I would like to see it. Is that okay? Yi Xian smiled and said, sure. The painter smiled faintly and turned to leave. On the city wall, Yi Xian turned and looked far away. At the end was the Moke clan. Sword. This Moke sword, Yi Xian thought and said, I will definitely return this sword. I am busy now. I will return it in the future. With that, he turned and left. Moke clan, in a hall. The hunchbacked elder looked at Wuxia. You lent the sword to Yi Xian? Wuxia nodded. The hunchbacked elder was silent for a moment and said, will he return it? Wuxia hesitated and said, as the most monstrous genius of never-ending Starfield, I believe in his character. The hunchbacked elder said softly, according to my investigation, in this guy's eyes, character is not worth much. Wuxia. Chapter 484. After Wuxia left the hall, he went to the top of a mountain and sat cross-legged on the ground. He slowly closed his eyes and placed his hands on his legs. At that moment, his mind was filled with images of the previous battle. After that battle, he had also discovered many of his shortcomings. Apart from that, he had also learned many things. In particular, he had benefited greatly from the battle with Yi Xian. In the following time, the people of the Moke clan and the never-ending star field were healing and recuperating. Because everyone knew that the Foreign Land and Sky River Star Field would make a comeback. And when the experts of the Foreign Land and Sky River Star Field made a comeback, it would be the day of the final battle. Inside the stone house, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him was the Moke sword. After this sword had offended Xiaolinger, it had been chased by Xiaolinger. Seeing that Xiaolinger was still angry, Yi Xian had brought it out. The Moke sword. Looking at the sword in front of him, Yi Xian fell silent. The Moke force. He had experienced this kind of power before. It was very powerful, and it felt so good. However, this power had always wanted to enslave him. This was a double-edged sword. At that moment, Little Soul's voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Young master, this sword is not simple. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, how is it not simple? Little Soul said, this sword has its own source of power, and it seems to be endless. This kind of sword is extremely rare. In addition, the pair of eyes on the sword is a little strange. Yi Xian asked, strange? What do you mean? Little Soul said, I don't know, but it gives me a strange feeling. This sword should also be at the creation realm, and it should be at the connate creation realm. Yi Xian said in a low voice, even creation realm artifacts are divided into innate and acquired? Yes, the realm of creation is divided into 3 types. The first is the acquired realm of creation, which is man-made and has limited power. The second is the innate realm, which is a treasure of the realm of creation. It is not man-made, or rather, it is there in the first place, but in the later stages, it is man-made. For example, I absorbed the souls of the underworld race for tens of thousands of years and used them to condense my own soul. Finally, it was the body that the old master created for me. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. The same goes for the Moke sword, right? More or less, Little Soul said. Yi Xian asked again, what about the third one? It's man-made, Little Soul said in a low voice. Yi Xian was stunned. Little Soul explained, some man-made creation realm treasures are even more powerful than creation realm treasures of connate existences. When a person reaches a certain level, they can indeed go against the heavens. Yi Xian looked at the Moke sword in front of him. He had to say that both this sword and the soul-suppressing sword were somewhat heaven-defying. The biggest problem was that this sword was somewhat different from Little Soul's. Little Soul took the initiative to recognize him as its master, but this sword had no intention of recognizing him as its master. Not only did it not want to recognize him as its master, but it wanted to enslave him. It was a very thoughtful sword. A moment later, Yi Xian put away the Moke sword and left the stone house. Yi Xian came to the valley where the Moke clan was. As soon as he arrived, a young man appeared in front of him. It was Zhuo Qing. Zhuo Qing glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. Brother Yi, is there something you need? Yi Xian nodded. I want to see him. Zhuo Qing naturally knew who Yi Xian was talking about and immediately nodded. Come with me. Soon, Yi Xian followed Zhuo Qing to the top of a mountain. Seeing Yi Xian, Wuxia, who was originally meditating, got up and walked in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and opened his right hand. The moke sword appeared in his hand. Then, he handed the sword to Wuxia. Wuxia looked at Yi Xian. Brother Yi, Yi Xian smiled. Returning it to its rightful owner. He, Yi Xian, was not a bandit. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He would never take something that belonged to him, especially when it was lent to him by someone else. Shameless, there must be a bottom line. Wuxia reached out and held the sword. After a while, he handed it to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was puzzled. This? Wuxia said, this sword will only be buried in the Moke clan. It can only shine in your hands. Yi Xian said in a low voice, this is a creation realm treasure. Wuxia smiled. I know. Then, he looked at Yi Xian. Next, the Moke clan will join forces with the never-ending Starfield. Whether we can survive is another matter. Then, he turned to look at the sky and said softly, the grudge between the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield. Then, he shook his head. If we can't survive this time, all this will be meaningless. Yi Xian nodded. Brother Mo, there is something I don't understand. Why do the foreign region and the Sky River Starfield want to destroy the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield? To fight for territory? Wuxia said softly, something like that. Then, he looked at the sky. There are many starfields nearby. The Sky River Starfield, the foreign region, the never-ending Starfield, the Spirit Void Starfield. Now, the only ones that can survive are the Spirit Void Starfield and the never-ending Starfield. The Spirit Void Starfield is the furthest from us. There are spatial turbulences around it. There is no way to set up a teleportation array there. Also, the Spirit Void Star Palace is powerful, so the never-ending Starfield is the best choice for everyone. Yi Xian said in a low voice, can't survive? The spirit chi is disappearing? Wuxia nodded. Every world has spirit chi. For example, the never-ending Starfield has origin chi. However, this spirit chi is not endless. There will be a day when it is completely gone. Then, he turned to look at the burial wall and said softly, the spirit chi in the never-ending Starfield can last for about 100 years. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Then, he hesitated and said, the Moke clan can live together with the never-ending Starfield if they come to the never-ending Starfield, right? Wuxia smiled. When the Moke clan first came here, we wanted to conquer the never-ending Starfield and monopolize it. But the factions in the never-ending Starfield will never allow any outside faction to encroach on their interests. So, there is no room for negotiation. Do you understand? Yi Xian was silent. Then Wuxia looked at Yi Xian. If I call the shots for the Moke clan, I can lead the Moke clan to live in this Starfield and everyone can live in peace. Do you agree? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. You can call the shots for the Moke clan, but I can't call the shots for the never-ending Starfield. Wuxia thought for a moment and said, fine. We can talk about this after this matter is over. Come with me. I'll take you somewhere. Then, he turned and walked into the distance. Zhuo Qing gestured for him to follow. Yi Xian nodded slightly and followed. Soon, Wuxia brought Yi Xian to an underground cave. After walking for about an hour, Wuxia finally stopped. At this moment, not far from the three of them, there was a stone platform. On the stone platform, a middle-aged man sat cross-legged. The middle-aged man's hair fell over his shoulders, and his hands were placed on his knees. There was not the slightest bit of aura coming from him. Yi Xian asked, "This is?" Mo Xie said softly, "The ancestor of the Moke clan was a swordsman. He was also the only swordsman in the Moke clan. After him, no one else has been able to control the Moke sword." Yi Xian said, "Why did you bring me here?" Mo Xie led Yi Xian to the middle-aged man. Yi Xian saw an ancient book in front of the middle-aged man. On the top of the book were 4 words, Moke sword. Mo Xie said softly, "This sword technique should not be buried here. Moreover, there is a way to control the Moke force. It should be very useful to you." As he spoke, he picked up the ancient book and handed it to Yi Xian. "This is for you." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I still don't understand." Mo Xie smiled. "You don't understand why I gave you the sword, and this sword scroll. This chapter is not over. Please continue." "Technique?" Yi Xian nodded. Mo Xie said softly, "I am also doing this for the Moke clan." Yi Xian looked at Mo Xie. Mo Xie smiled. "I only have one request. One day, you will be in charge of the never-ending star field. We will sit down and talk. A talk that doesn't involve fighting and no one dies. Is that okay?" Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. "Okay." Mo Xie nodded slightly and turned to leave. Zhuo Qing glanced at Yi Xian and also turned to leave. Yi Xian looked at the ancient book in his hand and fell silent. From Mo Xie's words, he realized that Mo Xie did not want war either. Indeed, if they continued fighting, more people would die. Of course, this was all in the future. Now, whether it was the Moke clan or the never-ending star field, everyone had to face the foreign land and Sky River star field. Whether they could survive was a problem. Yi Xian collected his thoughts, turned around, and left with the scroll. On the mountain peak, as he watched Yi Xian disappear into the distance, the hunchbacked elder behind Mo Xie asked softly, "Is it worth it?" Mo Xie smiled. "Patriarch, the Moke sword will only be gathering dust in our hands, won't it?" The hunchbacked elder said, "But it's still ours." Mo Xie said softly, "We have a common enemy now." The hunchbacked elder asked, "And then?" Mo Xie said, "We might die." The hunchbacked elder said, "We might also survive." Mo Xie fell silent. The hunchbacked elder continued, "If he survives, he might be your enemy. Without him, the never-ending star field's younger generation will have no match for you. When that time comes, you will be the strongest of the younger generation in this star field." Mo Xie smiled. "Patriarch, what's the point of being the strongest?" The hunchbacked old man looked at Mo Xie. Mo Xie smiled and said, "If we both survive, and I fight him again in the end, I will do everything in my power to kill him." With that, he turned and left. The hunchbacked elder looked at Mo Xie's back. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face. How can the Moke clan not be happy to have such a son? With that, he disappeared. Yi Xian returned to the Great Wall of Burial Sky. In the stone house, he looked at the Moke sword in his hand. As he stared, Yi Xian's expression gradually turned solemn. The Moke sword. The Moke sword gathered the Moke power in the Moke sword and unleashed its strongest attack. Backlash. The Moke clan's ancestor did not suffer any backlash, but if he used it, he would. And it would be a huge backlash, because the backlash would be controlled by the Moke power and turn him into a sword slave. Before the Moke clan's ancestor, there were dozens of swordsmen who decided to be enslaved by the Moke power. In the stone house, Yi Xian thought for a moment and brought the Moke sword to the prison tower. The Moke sword began to tremble as if it was afraid of something. Yi Xian brought the Moke sword to the top of the tower. At that moment, the Moke sword began to tremble violently. Yi Xian glanced at the 2 swords in front of him and said, "Moke sword, I don't mean anything else. I just want to tell you. I have nothing to do with the two swords in front of you. Really, if you want to bite me, they won't kill you. The Moke Sword. P.S. Brothers, is there anyone who knows how to make videos or draw pictures? I hope to make a short video of the sword domain with pictures of the characters. It's not for free, and I'll pay for it. I hope to find someone to draw a few pictures of Tian Ming, the Unfettered One, Yang Yi, Snowy, Arya, Xiao, and a few short videos. Are there any big shots who are skilled in such things? If there are, then contact me. I really don't want to be a freeloader. I'll pay as much as you want. Of course, don't screw me over. I'm not that rich. End of this chapter. Chapter 485. At the top of the tower, the Moke Sword in Yi Xian's hand trembled violently. Yi Xian looked at the Moke Sword and smiled. Don't be nervous. Really, I mean no harm. The Moke Sword was speechless. Yi Xian looked at the two swords in front of him and said softly, "Don't worry, it won't hurt me." Then, he looked at the Moke Sword. Am I right? The Moke Sword was speechless. Yi Xian turned to look at the two swords and smiled. Don't worry, I'll definitely be fine. After saying that, he walked down the tower with the Moke Sword. Yi Xian returned to the first level with the Moke Sword. He looked at the Moke Sword in front of him. Don't worry, I won't enslave you. You and I are equal. However, the condition is that you don't harm me. Otherwise, I hope we can cooperate well. After saying that, he gripped the Moke Sword tightly and began to chant something. Moke Mental Cultivation Method. This was a mental cultivation method created by the senior of the Moke clan. It could stabilize one's mind. About 15 minutes later, Yi Xian suddenly gripped the Moke Sword. Soon, a powerful force gathered in his body. Moke Power. When this force entered Yi Xian's body, he immediately became excited. Power. Once again, he felt that kind of tempting power, as if it was endless. However, Yi Xian quickly calmed down. Power. This power was very tempting, but it was not his power. This was the power of the Moke Sword. It did not belong to him. He could borrow this power, but he could not rely on it. Yi Xian guarded his mind and continued to absorb that power. Soon, more and more Moke power entered his body, swell. This was what Yi Xian felt at that moment. He felt like his body was full of power. It was as if he could kill everything in a second. After a while, Yi Xian began to guide that power. During this process, he could feel that the Moke Sword did not cause any trouble. However, he still did not dare to be careless. He was still very careful and made the soul-suppressing sword pay attention to the Moke Sword at all times. If the Moke Sword dared to mess around, he wouldn't show any mercy. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. The power on Yi Xian's body grew stronger and stronger. Roughly 2 hours later, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly opened, revealing 2 blood-red pupils. Eye of Moke. Yi Xian gripped his sword tightly in his right hand. In his eyes, there was a flash of sword light. At this moment, he finally realized that the source of the Sword of Moke's power came from these eyes. Apart from the pupils, there was nothing special about the Sword of Moke. However, the combination of the two and the mastery of the swordsman made the sword extremely powerful. The death of Moke. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Very quickly, he felt a series of scenes. A gloomy world, with dead people everywhere, and a pair of eyes looking down on everything in the dark. No, it should be said that it was devouring all the killing intent and resentment, murder. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly emanated a powerful murderous aura. At the same time, his eyes turned blood red. Murderous intent. Yi Xian felt that his mind was about to be controlled by this murderous intent. Sensing this, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He quickly said angrily, "Don't cause trouble for me." However, the murderous intent grew stronger and stronger. At the same time, the aura emanating from his body also grew stronger. Yi Xian was shocked because he realized that he was about to lose control of this power. Without any hesitation, he quickly sent the pair of eyes back into the Mo-Ku sword. Inside the Mo-Ku sword. Boom! Yi Xian's entire body instantly collapsed to the ground like a deflated balloon. On the ground, Yi Xian panted heavily. His face was covered in cold sweat. In that instant, he actually wanted to kill someone. He wanted to kill anyone. Only when he thought of Yi Ling did that murderous intent weaken a little. However, his murderous intent was still strong. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly sat up. His expression was somewhat fierce. At this moment, Soul's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "Young master, this is not its fault." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Soul said in a low voice, "Young master, this is the nature of the Mo-Ku sword. If you want to control it, there are only two ways. The first is to obey it and be controlled by it. The second is to suppress it and make it under your control." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Under my control?" Soul said, "Yes, young master can control it." Yi Xian asked, "How do I control it?" Soul said, "If you are not controlled by it, and your mind is clear, you can control it. Because it is not deliberately targeting young master. Otherwise, with young master's current strength, it is absolutely impossible to suppress it. But I don't understand, why does it not target you, young master?" Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. Soon, he said seriously, "It must have seen my extraordinary talent, so it wants to follow me." Soul said, That's impossible, right?" Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. "Soul, what do you mean? What do you mean by impossible?" Soul giggled and did not say anything. Yi Xian, a moment later, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, looking at the Mo-Ku sword in front of him. There was only one way to conquer this sword, and that was not to be controlled by it. Fear still lingered in his heart from the scene just now. That murderous intent was too strong. He was afraid that he would be controlled by the murderous intent, and then do something that he would regret. Fear. Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. He was actually afraid. He had never had this kind of thought before, and he was afraid of a sword. How could he be afraid? And he was afraid of a sword. Gradually, Yi Xian's expression became a little ugly. If he was afraid of a sword, how could he cultivate the sword? Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly gripped the Mo-Ku sword with both hands, and the next moment, endless Mo-Ku power gathered towards him. As more and more Mo-Ku power entered his body, Yi Xian's body gradually began to tremble, and that murderous intent appeared again. Not only that, but a pair of blood-red eyes appeared in his eye sockets. As this pair of blood-red eyes appeared, Yi Xian found that the murderous intent had begun to devour his mind. Yi Xian gritted his teeth. At this moment, he no longer retreated, but faced this murderous intent head-on. The more he retreated, the more afraid he became. Yi Xian began to accept this murderous intent, but he still kept his mind clear. Leave a trace of clarity, and maintain his original heart. That was what he needed to do now. Time passed bit by bit, and the murderous intent around Yi Xian grew stronger. Not only that, but his expression also became more ferocious, like a demon. Beside him, Xiaoling looked at Yi Xian with a little fear. She hugged the god on the second floor next to her tightly, and pointed a small claw at Yi Xian, not knowing what to say. The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian without saying anything. Just like that, about 4 hours later, Yi Xian's aura grew stronger, so strong that it had surpassed the saint realm. However, at this moment, the murderous intent around Yi Xian was also terrifying. Xiao Ling looked at the god on the second floor, and the god said softly, if he can endure it, he will be reborn. If he can't, then he can't blame anyone else. This is the path he chose. As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian in the distance. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. Yi Xian's aura was still growing stronger, but at the same time, the murderous intent was also growing stronger. This was not Yi Xian's murderous intent, but the murderous intent of Mo's puppet. Therefore, this murderous intent was not under Yi Xian's control. On the contrary, Yi Xian might even be controlled by this murderous intent. Now, it all depended on who was stronger, him or this murderous intent. The god on the second floor glanced at the fifth floor, and then looked at Yi Xian with a trace of worry in her eyes. Another 2 hours passed. At this time, Yi Xian's body began to tremble violently, as if he was having an epileptic fit. Seeing this scene, the god on the second floor frowned. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly stood up and walked towards her and Xiao Ling. Xiao Ling hurriedly ran behind the god on the second floor. She covered her eyes with both hands, not daring to look at Yi Xian. The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian walked in front of the god on the second floor and pointed his sword at her. The god on the second floor was expressionless. All of a sudden, Yi Xian thrust forward. The god on the second floor did not dodge, but the sword stopped half an inch away from the god's eyebrows. Yi Xian suddenly grinned. Just kidding. With that, he withdrew his sword. At this time, the god on the second floor suddenly pressed forward. The next moment, Yi Xian felt a sharp pain in his abdomen, and then his whole body flew out. The god on the second floor walked towards Yi Xian. Kidding? I was also kidding. With that, her speed suddenly increased, bang. Yi Xian flew out again. A moment later, Yi Xian sat on the ground with his back against the wall. The Mo sword was in front of him, and the god on the second floor was not far away. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. He had brought this upon himself. The god on the second floor walked in front of Yi Xian. Have you subdued it? Yi Xian nodded slightly. But, it's not very stable yet. The god on the second floor said, that power, after all, is not yours, understand? Yi Xian nodded. I understand. I will not rely too much on this power. With that, he looked at the god on the second floor. What is the attitude of the fifth floor? The god on the second floor was silent. Yi Xian said in a low voice, must he kill me? The god on the second floor shook his head. He wants the pagoda, and the pagoda is now at its weakest. Plus, the woman in the plain dress is not here, so now is the best time for him to take the pagoda. And if he wants the pagoda, you must die. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, there is no way to turn an enemy into a friend? The god on the second floor said calmly, why don't you go talk to him? Yi Xian shook his head. Beg him not to kill me? The god on the second floor was silent. Yi Xian said softly, how can I really control this pagoda? The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian. Maybe never. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Why? The god on the second floor glanced around. This pagoda is 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times more terrible than you think. It is still asleep and has not shown its ferocious side. With that, she looked at Yi Xian. Jian Zizai gave up this pagoda because she knew that she could not control this pagoda. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, why did she choose me? Just because I am excellent? Just because I am different? Just because I... The god on the second floor suddenly punched out. Bang! Yi Xian flew out directly. The god on the second floor glanced at the flying Yi Xian and shook her head. I can't stand it. Chapter 486. After a while, Yi Xian leaned against the wall. At this moment, he was speechless. What kind of temper did this second-floor almighty have? Attacking at the slightest provocation was simply inhumane. The second-floor almighty looked at Yi Xian. You have to understand that this prison pagoda might not truly submit to you. Yi Xian looked at the second-floor almighty. The second-floor almighty said softly, the reason why it recognizes you as its master is most likely because of the plain-dressed woman. The plain-dressed woman can suppress these existences here. Moreover, it should be afraid of the plain-dressed woman. Submitting to you will allow it to gain the approval and support of the plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. This feeling is very uncomfortable. The second-floor almighty looked at Yi Xian. What's uncomfortable about it? Yi Xian shook his head. All along, I thought it chose me because it liked me. The second-floor almighty said, actually, this is also a possibility. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. These are not important. What is important is that you have to understand one thing. It is stronger than you, much stronger. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. However, I have no choice, right? The second-floor almighty was silent. Did Yi Xian have a choice? In fact, he had no choice. Choose not to take the prison pagoda? The problem was that the prison pagoda had found him, not that he had chosen the prison pagoda. The second-floor almighty shook her head. At this moment, she suddenly felt a little lost. Because in the unseen world, many things seem to have been predestined. Yi Xian suddenly stood up and smiled. Actually, I should thank it. The second-floor almighty looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. Because it has brought me many benefits. For example, you, the Space Dao Law, the Grand Dao Law, and Miss Jian. And you all have helped me. And that sword that left. I can't only see the disadvantages, can I? The second-floor almighty nodded. It's good that you have such a mentality. Yi Xian looked up at the fifth floor. As for the fifth floor, as he spoke, he looked at the almighty on the second floor. If I didn't have the help of the plain-dressed girl, I wouldn't have any chance of winning. The almighty on the second floor didn't say anything. Yi Xian asked again, why isn't the fifth floor making a move yet? The great god on the second floor said, it's because of that sword. But soon, the other party will make a move. At this point, she looked at Yi Xian. I can feel that it won't take more than 5 days. 5 days. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. With that, he left the World Prison Pagoda. After Yi Xian left, the Almighty came to the fourth floor. She walked to the entrance to the fifth floor. Can't we talk? After a moment of silence, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out from the fifth floor. The face of the god on the second floor changed drastically. After a few breaths, blood slowly flowed from the corner of the second floor god's mouth. At the same time, a chuckle sounded from the fifth floor. Talk? What right does an ant have to talk to me? As the voice fell, the footsteps began to move towards the entrance. At this moment, above the top of the pagoda, a sword suddenly flew down. The next moment, the sword directly entered the fifth floor. Buzz! The sound of a sword rang out from the fifth floor. A moment later, the sword left the fifth floor and returned to the top of the pagoda. In the fifth floor, a voice suddenly sounded. The sword is not bad, but I don't know how the owner of the sword is. The Almighty on the second floor looked at the fifth floor. You should be able to see it. The Almighty on the fifth floor laughed. The sword has left this pagoda. I think it's going to find its owner. I hope its owner isn't too weak. Otherwise, when I come out, it will be a lot less fun. The face of the Almighty on the second floor darkened. The fifth floor was actually waiting for the owner of the sword. Was this arrogance? Arrogance? Or confidence? At this moment, she thought of Jian Zizi. She was. This woman was the best fighter in the Protoss. And she had personally experienced the strength of this woman. However, the other party could only be locked up on the fourth floor. The strength of the fifth floor was definitely above Jian Zizi. After a moment, the Almighty on the second floor turned and left. After Yi Xian left the World Prison Pagoda, he came to the mountain range where he used to cultivate. In the dense forest, Yi Xian walked slowly. In the dense forest, a light breeze blew, a little chilly. From Qingcheng until now, he had experienced a lot and seen a lot. Now, he was no longer naive and only wanted to live a peaceful life. In this kind of world, a peaceful life was undoubtedly courting death. Because one day, the whole world might suddenly be destroyed. Yi Xian looked up at the sky. At this moment, what he could see in the sky was a huge star net. The other world. The Sky River sector. The fifth floor. These people all wanted him dead. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Unknowingly, he had fallen into a desperate situation again. No, from Qingcheng until now, his situation had never been good. Survival. Yi Xian continued to walk forward. He found that he could no longer think about swordsmanship or martial arts. What he needed to do now was to live well. If he died, what would happen to his sister? What would happen to his mother? At this thought, Yi Xian's expression gradually became somewhat sinister. Live. He had to live well. Yi Xian opened his right hand, and a sword appeared in his hand. Immortal Spirit Sword. Yi Xian held the sword and pointed it at the ground. Soon, two kinds of sword intents suddenly appeared around him. One black and one white, one good and one evil. Good? Evil? He had never particularly understood good and evil, because in the world, good and evil were often decided by the strong. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. The emperors of the world, as long as they were defeated, they were bandits. As long as they were victorious, no matter how evil they were, they could also become good. Good and evil were determined by one's fist. But was that really the case? Perhaps so, but in his opinion, good and evil were in the human heart. Good was good, and evil was evil. Good and evil were determined by one's heart, not by others. He protected his sister, protected his mother, fought for himself, and fought for the never-ending starfield. That was good. At this thought, the sword intent of kindness in front of Yi Xian suddenly transformed into a sword light and shot into the sky. In the void, the sword intent turned into sword light and circled continuously. On top of the great wall of heaven burial wall, Wei Yang Tian looked up at the wisp of sword intent above the mountain range, deep in thought. Beside her was Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai said softly, "His sword intent?" Wei Yang Tian nodded. Mr. Bai thought for a moment, then said, "I underestimated him." Wei Yang Tian looked at the distant horizon, and in her mind, that scene from back then. That scene that she could not forget. In the dense forest, the sword intent in the sky transformed into a pure white sword and flew back to Yi Xian. It floated quietly in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was silent. Kindness. The kindness of the woman in the plain dress could change mountains and rivers with a single thought. Because of her powerful strength, she could determine the life and death of all things with a single thought. The kindness and evil of the woman in the plain dress transcended herself and the great Tao. He was far from being able to do that, so there was no need for him to learn from the woman in the plain dress. His kindness was to live well, protect his sister, protect his mother, and protect everything he wanted to protect. It was that simple. At this thought, Yi Xian reached out with his left hand and grasped the pure white sword. The pure white sword trembled slightly and suddenly disappeared. But in the next moment, the sword reappeared 100 zhang away. It did not travel through space, but wherever his kindness went, the sword would go. The sword of kindness was born from the heart and condensed from thoughts. It was not restricted by space and was not trapped by heaven and earth. What was evil? Was killing evil? What about killing those who deserved to be killed? Whether it was good or evil, it was determined by one's heart. He would not kill those who should not be killed, but he would kill those who deserved to be killed, and he would kill them ruthlessly. Good and evil were determined, and the heart and mind were connected. Two swords suddenly flew out in front of Yi Xian. They were swords condensed from the sword of kindness and evil. Different from the sword of qi, they were not restricted by space and could appear anywhere he wanted. Compared to the sword of qi, they were even more mysterious. The two swords represented his way of the sword. At this moment, the two swords suddenly returned to him. Yi Xian took out the moke sword. In the next moment, the two swords transformed into one black and 100 white sword rays that entered the moke sword. Yi Xian held the moke sword in his hand. Endless moke power entered his body. About an hour later, Yi Xian's lips curled into a smile. After the good and evil sword intents were suppressed, the killing intent could no longer affect him. Not only that, but even the moke power could be suppressed by his sword intent. The sword of kindness and evil could suppress the killing intent. It was not over yet. Yi Xian sat down cross-legged and waved his right hand. 9 saint-grade swords appeared in front of him. In the next moment, he picked up a sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. He began to madly absorb the energy of the swords. Cultivate. Become stronger. This was his current goal. As one sword after another was devoured by Yi Xian, the aura emanating from his body quickly grew stronger and stronger. The painter came to a mountain. This mountain towered in the clouds. Above the clouds, cranes flew by from time to time. It was like a fairyland. The painter walked to a large hall. At this moment, a white-haired woman appeared in front of him. The white-haired woman looked at the painter. "What are you doing here?" The painter smiled. "Senior sister, the white-haired woman shook her head. "From the moment you left the Xian gate, we were no longer senior sister and junior sister." The painter smiled. "Senior sister, you have known me since I was young. You know that I have no desire for the position of Xian Gate sect master. Making me the sect master is the same as taking my life." The white-haired woman looked at the painter. "Do you not want to be the sect master, or do you not want to compete with me?" The painter said softly, "In my heart, you will always be that senior sister who took care of me since I was young. No matter what, it is not as important as you." The white-haired woman looked at the painter. After a moment, her eyes became somewhat complicated. "You are the most outstanding genius of our Xian Gate. If you become the sect master, Xian Gate will definitely prosper." The painter shook his head. "I am too lazy. I do not like these trivial matters. If I do it, Xian Gate will only be a mess. With senior sister here, Xian Gate will become better. In fact, Xian Gate will also be better than before." The white-haired woman said softly, "Are you praising me?" The painter smiled. "Senior sister, this time, I came to ask for your help." The white-haired woman asked, "Never-ending star field?" The painter nodded. The white-haired woman was silent. The painter asked, "What is it?" The white-haired woman opened her palm. A sword of order was in her hand. Seeing this sword of order, the painter's face instantly darkened. The white-haired woman looked up at the horizon and said softly, 9 star fields, 12 saint-rank mercenary groups, 26 mutant sorcerers, 72 saint-rank knights. Who can stop them?" As she spoke, she looked at the painter. "Leave never-ending star field." The painter was silent. P.S. My hope in this lifetime is if Sword Domain can be made into an animation, that would be great. However, it is also difficult. I heard that making an animation is even more expensive than a television series. Chapter 487. Leave the never-ending starfield. The painter fell silent. In front of the painter, the white-haired woman said softly, "The never-ending starfield can't stop them." The painter smiled, "But we can't just give up like this, right?" The white-haired woman looked at the painter, "You should know that if you stay, you will only be sending yourself to death." The painter said softly, "Perhaps." With that, she turned and left. The white-haired woman suddenly said, "Master." The painter didn't stop. She continued walking forward. She couldn't speak anymore. Because if the mystic gate joined in, it would only be a meaningless sacrifice. At this moment, a woman appeared in front of the painter. Her clothes were as white as snow, untainted by a speck of dust. The white-haired woman was stunned. "Little un." The woman in front of her was Enlancio. The painter sized up Enlancio and said with a smile, "Senior sister, I heard that a very good genius appeared in our mystic gate. Is it her?" The white-haired woman nodded, "Yes." The painter smiled, not bad at all." Enlancio looked straight at the painter, "I will go with you." The painter was stunned. The white-haired woman frowned, "Little un." Enlancio looked at the white-haired woman and said softly, "Sect master, he and I are friends." The white-haired woman said in a low voice, "Do you know what he is facing now?" Enlancio said, "Then all the more I should go." The white-haired woman stared at Enlancio, "You are not allowed." Enlancio shook her head, "You can't stop me." The white-haired woman was about to attack when the painter suddenly said, "Senior sister, let her go with me." The white-haired woman looked at the painter and frowned, "Are you crazy?" The painter smiled, "Senior sister, she should experience such a great battle. I know what senior sister is worried about. I will guarantee senior sister that she will be safe. Is that all right?" The white-haired woman glanced at Enlancio, "You must go?" Enlancio nodded. The white-haired woman sighed softly and waved her right hand. A seal that seemed to be cast from ice appeared in front of Enlancio. Enlancio was stunned, puzzled. The painter smiled, "The mystic ice seal, my mystic gate's most precious treasure, accept it." Enlancio accepted the mystic ice seal and bowed to the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman looked at the two of them, "Come back safely." The artist nodded. "I will do my best." As soon as she finished speaking, she brought Enlancio along and vanished on the spot. After the two of them left, an old man appeared behind the white-haired woman, and the old man said in a low voice, "Sect master, you shouldn't have let that girl leave." The white-haired woman shook her head. "Xiaofan is very stubborn. We can't change her mind." The old man said, "She is our most outstanding genius." The white-haired woman said softly, "That's why we can't keep them in captivity." As she spoke, she looked up at the horizon. The star enforcers. How can the never-ending star domain stop them? A man sat cross-legged on the peak of a mountain. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he had entered a meditative state. This person was Wuxia. Not far behind Wuxia was the hunchbacked old man. When the sky darkened, Wuxia, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly stood up. In the next moment, a powerful aura swept out from his body, but very quickly, this aura disappeared. The hunchbacked elder asked, "You broke through?" Wuxia nodded slightly. At that moment, he had reached the creation realm from the sage realm. In terms of realm, it could be said that he was among the top experts on this continent. Wuxia looked up at the starry sky. In the starry sky, the star web was still there. The hunchbacked elder suddenly said, "No matter what, you must live. You are the hope." Wuxia shook his head. "The Moke clan has no deserters. I can be the last to die, but I will never be the last to live." As he spoke, he looked at the hunchbacked elder. "Patriarch, take me to the ancestors." The hunchbacked elder hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Soon, the two of them disappeared. In the mountain range of the Great Wall of Burial Sky, Yi Xian had already devoured all the swords. At that moment, he was very calm, and the aura emitted from his body was also very calm. Not far to the right of Yi Xian, Lian Wanli leaned against a large tree with her arms crossed. She looked at Yi Xian, and beside her was Xiao Ling. This little guy would often come out for a stroll now. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, there was a pair of blood-red pupils. The Moke Eye. Now, he had already used this pair of pupils as his own eyes. For the time being, it was not bad. Not far away, Lian Wanli suddenly said, "What realm?" Yi Xian looked at Lian Wanli. "Ethereal opening." Lian Wanli frowned slightly. "Why?" Yi Xian smiled. "I cultivate in adversity. I walk through every realm again." Lian Wanli walked in front of Yi Xian. "Cultivate in adversity?" Yi Xian nodded, then explained to Lian Wanli. After a while, Lian Wanli asked curiously, "How does it feel to cultivate like this?" Yi Xian said softly, "Walking through it again, there will be many new discoveries." Lian Wanli smiled. "Fight?" Yi Xian smiled. "What do you think after the incident?" Lian Wanli said, "What if we both die?" Yi Xian said softly, "Then it's a draw." Lian Wanli thought about it and said, "Sure." Yi Xian looked up at the sky. The star web was still there. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "I don't like to sit around and wait for death." As he spoke, he looked at Lian Wanli. "Do something?" The corners of Lian Wanli's mouth curled up slightly. "That's exactly what I want." Yi Xian suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky, and Lian Wanli followed closely behind. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to arrive before the star web. Meanwhile, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. This person was the divine mage, Yan Sheng. Yan Sheng stared at Yi Xian and was about to speak when his expression changed drastically. In the next moment, he pressed his hands together, and a powerful flame swept out from his body. At the same time, he forcefully dodged to the side. An instant later, Yan Sheng appeared 300 m to the right. However, his arms were gone. Moreover, they were falling slowly to the ground where he stood just now. Yan Sheng stared fixedly at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in his eyes. In that instant just now, he'd instinctively sensed danger. However, he hadn't seen how Yi Xian had attacked. Moreover, he hadn't seen how the sword had vanished as well. That sword was like a ghost. If he'd been just a little slower, even just a little, then he would have lost his life. Yan Sheng gazed at Yi Xian with extreme terror in his heart. When did Yi Xian's strength become so terrifying? Yi Xian gazed at Yan Sheng. The latter's expression changed, and he moved 300 m back once more. Yi Xian said in his heart, "What a pity." Just now, he'd intended to take Yan Sheng by surprise. Unfortunately, Yan Sheng was too strong and reacted too quickly. Even if he'd suddenly attacked, Yan Sheng was actually able to react in time. Fortunately, chopping off Yan Sheng's arms was still a gain. As Yi Xian walked towards Yan Sheng, two red-robed old men suddenly appeared behind the latter. Two divine wizards. Yi Xian stopped and said, "Don't be like this. Let's fight one-on-one." Yan Sheng gazed at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, I have to say that you've indeed given the old man a huge surprise. However, you don't know that the more monstrous you are, the more we won't let you off." Yi Xian shook his head. "Would you let me off if I wasn't a monstrous genius? Don't talk nonsense." As he spoke, he pointed his sword at the old man, one-on-one. If you're a man, let's fight one-on-one. Yansheng sneered, one-on-one? You're so naive. Kill him. As soon as he finished speaking, the two behind him formed seals with their hands and started to chant incantations. Right at this moment, two swords suddenly appeared before them. One of the swords was white and the other black, and they appeared without any warning. The expressions of the two divine wizards changed drastically. At this moment, they didn't even have time to chant any incantations, and they turned around and flashed. Meanwhile, Yi Xian and Lian Wanli suddenly vanished on the spot. Nearby, Yansheng's expression changed drastically because Yi Xian was coming for him. Without any hesitation, Yansheng stomped his right foot lightly. Hiss! Yansheng vanished on the spot, and when he reappeared, he was already behind the star web. However, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed at the other divine wizard. The divine wizard formed hand seals with both hands and was just about to chant an incantation when two swords silently appeared in front of him again and slashed down at him. The divine wizard's expression changed drastically, and he didn't dare to continue chanting an incantation. He immediately flashed and retreated. However, the two swords were like maggots on a bone, and they chased after him closely. They were even faster than him, and he didn't have time to chant an incantation. At this moment, the divine wizard was horrified. The main reason was that Yi Xian's swords were too fast, and he would be pierced through the chest if he was the slightest bit careless. Therefore, he couldn't use any secret techniques at all. With this retreat, the divine wizard retreated into the star web. However, as soon as he retreated into the star web, a miserable scream resounded from outside the star web. Yansheng and the divine wizard turned to look outside, and they saw a bloody head slowly falling from the sky. Yansheng and the divine wizard's expressions instantly turned extremely ugly when they saw this scene. At this moment, they realized that Yi Xian's real target wasn't them, but the other divine wizard that was being held back by Lian Wanli. Yi Xian and Lian Wanli had actually killed a divine wizard in an instant. In the distance, beside Yi Xian, Lian Wanli glanced at the falling head below. If they can't use their secret techniques, so weak. Yi Xian nodded slightly. At this moment, he also realized that although these divine wizards were very powerful, they also had a fatal weakness, and that was that they couldn't get close to them. To be more precise, as long as they weren't allowed to cast spells, they were as weak as chickens. However, the prerequisite was that the flying swords had to be fast enough to prevent these people from using their secret techniques. Once these people used their secret techniques, it would really be a little too destructive. Yi Xian walked in front of the star web and looked at Yansheng and the others. Didn't you want that treasure? Come out. Yansheng looked at Yi Xian. You're very arrogant. Yi Xian grinned. I'm arrogant, come out and hit me. Lian Wanli, Yansheng stared at Yi Xian. Come in. Yi Xian said, come out. Yansheng said calmly, aren't you very powerful? Come in. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile and turned to leave. However, when he turned around, he suddenly coughed violently. Not only that, but he also bent his waist, but he quickly straightened it. Seeing this scene, Yansheng frowned slightly. The next moment, he seemed to think of something and hurriedly said, stop him, he's suffering from a backlash. Behind Yansheng, the divine wizard hurriedly rushed out. However, as soon as he came out of the star web, two swords silently appeared behind him. At the same time, an azure dragon saber appeared in front of him. The god mage's eyes were wide open, filled with sorrow and despair. He knew that he was finished. Because he realized that Yi Xian had long planned this. This time, not only was he caught off guard, but he was also tricked by Yi Xian. An instant later. Qi. The divine wizard who had just come out was directly beheaded. Yansheng, who was about to come out, froze in place. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly clutched his stomach. Ouch, I'm suffering from a backlash. I'm suffering from a backlash, come and hit me. Yan Sheng. Chapter 488. Lian Wanli glanced at Yi Xian and shook her head. You're asking for a beating. Yi Xian laughed, then turned to look at Yan Sheng, whose expression was extremely ugly. The strongest of the foreign domain? Just so. Huh. After saying that, he turned into a sword light and disappeared into the horizon. Lian Wanli glanced at Yan Sheng and said apologetically, sorry, he's a straightforward person and likes to speak the truth. Please don't mind him. After saying that, she turned and floated away. Ah! Yan Sheng suddenly roared, his whole body trembling with anger. At this moment, his expression suddenly changed. The next moment, he suddenly detonated his body. Boom! Yan Sheng's body collapsed, but his soul had already appeared hundreds of feet away. And there stood a person where Yan Sheng had been standing. This person was Yi Xian, who had previously left. Yi Xian looked up at Yan Sheng, who was not far away. Yan Sheng looked at Yi Xian in horror. You, how could you pass through the star web without a sound? You. At this moment, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly turned into the soul-suppressing sword. The next moment, he held the sword and pointed at Yan Sheng. Soul separation. As soon as he said that, Yan Sheng in the distance was instantly horrified. He frantically retreated, but in the process of retreating, his soul actually disintegrated bit by bit. Yan Sheng looked at Yi Xian in horror. Yi Xian waved his sword, and Yan Sheng's soul immediately turned into a black light and was absorbed by Little Soul. After a moment, Little Soul's excited voice sounded. What a powerful soul! Young lord, I want more. Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. You want more? What do you think this is? A cabbage? Little Soul said excitedly, Young lord, this is a great supplement. After I devour it, I can quickly recover. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. If there's a chance, I'll definitely let you absorb more. Little Soul hurriedly said, Thank you, young lord. I'm willing to climb a mountain of swords and go into a sea of flames for young lord, even if I die 10,000 times. Yi Xian's expression froze. After a long time, he shook his head, so you're like this, Little Soul. Xiaofan, right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing not far away. Celestial Venerable. The painter who had fought against endless heaven. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian used the Space Dao Law to retreat out of Star Web. The Empyrean looked at Yi Xian, You really surprise me. Needless to say, Yi Xian killing 3 divine mages by himself was a bit too exaggerated. Of course, this was an exaggeration. If Yan Sheng hadn't underestimated Yi Xian in the beginning and hadn't guarded against Yi Xian wouldn't have been able to cut off Yan Sheng's arms in an instant. With 3 divine wizards working together, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to resist them at all. However, these 3 people were defeated by Yi Xian one by one. Yi Xian took one look at the Empyrean, then turned to leave. However, to his surprise, the Empyrean had no intention of attacking at all. Not long after Yi Xian left, a woman appeared where Yi Xian had been standing. The newcomer was none other than Endless Sky. The Empyrean looked at Endless Heaven. Palace Master Endless, you don't know who you're fighting. Endless Heaven said calmly, and then? The Empyrean smiled slightly, then turned to leave. Endless Heaven glanced at the starry sky behind Star Web. In the depths of the starry sky, she could vaguely see teleportation arrays. Teleportation arrays. She knew very well what this meant. A moment later, Endless Heaven turned to leave. Burial Sky Great Wall. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. In a stone house, the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield powerhouses were all there. Yi Xian and Mo Xia were there as well. Inside the stone house, Wei Yang Tian said softly, I've already received news that there are 9 star fields, 12 saint-rank mercenary groups, 26 special sorcerers, 72 saint-rank knights, and 19 saint-rank demonic beasts participating in the encirclement. The hunchbacked old man's face gradually darkened when he heard that. Yi Xian suddenly asked, saint-rank mercenary groups? Endless Heaven looked at Yi Xian. In the starry sky, there are some forces formed by people that specialize in killing and robbing people. A mercenary group that can reach the saint rank means that they have at least one creation realm powerhouse, and the rest are at least at the saint rank. As for the mutant sorcerers, they belong to the same sect as the god sorcerers. However, these mutant sorcerers like to play dirty, and their methods are slightly different. Speaking up to this point, she paused for a moment and continued, these saint knights should have been trained by the keeper of order. Every single one of them is a peak saint knight. Moreover, their combat strength is extremely strong, the kind that doesn't need to be exaggerated. Hearing that, everyone suddenly quieted down. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stood up and said softly, do we have any other choice? Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, for us, we have no other choice. So, what we can do is to fight to the death. As for the others, we are going to die anyway, but before we die, we must drag down as many scapegoats as possible. Everyone looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian said again, there is no other choice. Isn't that right? Endless Heaven nodded slightly. For us, there is no other choice now. If we win this battle, everyone will live, but if we die. At this point, she looked at Yi Xian. Then as she said, drag more scapegoats with us. The hunchbacked old man nodded. Fight. Fight to the last person. Fight. In the entire stone house, no one said anything about surrendering or negotiating. Because this was simply impossible. Yi Xian left the stone house. At this moment, Mo Xia followed him out. The two of them walked down the Great Wall. Mo Xia said, you can already control that sword? Yi Xian nodded. Mo Xia smiled lightly. As expected, it is still suitable for you. Yi Xian said softly, thank you. Mo Xia looked up at the starry sky. Do you think we will win? Yi Xian smiled and said, no. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, the more afraid we are of losing, the more likely we will lose. The more afraid we are of dying, the more likely we will die. Mo Xia smiled slightly. Indeed. Put yourself in a desperate situation and you will be reborn. Yi Xian stopped and said softly, put yourself in a desperate situation and you will be reborn. Mo Xia glanced at Yi Xian. I hope everyone can survive. After saying this, he turned around and left. Staying where he was, Yi Xian kept walking forward after a moment of silence. Live. Who didn't want to live? Yi Xian also wanted to live. But at this moment, he could feel how powerful the enemy was. Not only the enemy outside, but also the 5th floor of the prison pagoda. Prison pagoda. This pagoda brought him an opportunity, but at the same time, it was also a great disaster. As the plain-dressed woman said, possessing this prison pagoda was a blessing and a curse to him. The plain-dressed woman. At this moment, Yi Xian thought of the plain-dressed woman. That woman was so strong that she was unreasonable. The appointment in the clouds. When the plain-dressed woman disappeared for the last time, she made a promise with him to meet in the clouds. This chapter is not finished, please continue. Actually, he also wanted to see her. Was there still a chance? Yi Xian looked up at the horizon. He was at a loss. Time passed bit by bit. At the end of the night, a smear of white appeared on the horizon. Soon, a red sun appeared on the horizon. At this moment, the star web covering the Great Wall suddenly disappeared. A man appeared in the sky above the Great Wall. The Celestial Venerable. The Celestial Venerable looked down. Anyone from the never-ending Starfield or the Moke clan will be spared if they surrender. Spared if they surrender. With the help of mystic energy, this sentence quickly spread throughout the Great Wall. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian appeared in front of the Celestial Venerable. Wei Yang Tian looked at the Celestial Venerable. "Don't waste your breath." The Celestial Venerable sneered. "Wei Yang Tian, since you want to die, we will fulfill your wish." As soon as he finished speaking, 72 powerhouses on black flaming horses suddenly swooped down. The people on these flaming horses were all sage powerhouses. Sage knights. 72 people swooped down. Their might was like that of a magnificent army with thousands of horses and men. Everyone felt a strong sense of oppression. Wei Yang Tian suddenly said, "Wei Yang Guards." As soon as he finished speaking, 16 Wei Yang Guards, led by a Gui, suddenly appeared behind him. At this moment, the hunchbacked elder suddenly said, "General Mo Ku." As soon as he finished speaking, 9 General Mo Ku appeared behind the hunchbacked elder. Wei Yang Tian said softly, "Kill." With a sickle in hand, a Gui led the 16 Wei Yang Guards into the sky. The 9 General Mo Ku of the Moke clan also charged out. 25 people against 72 people. In terms of momentum, the never-ending Starfield and the Moke clan did not lose to the 72 Sage Knights at all. The Celestial Venerable glanced at the Wei Yang Guards and General Mo Ku. He had to admit that these people were very strong. However, could 20 people really fight against 72 people? As soon as the battle began, the Wei Yang Guards and General Mo Ku were suppressed. The Wei Yang Guards and General Mo Ku were very strong because they were experts carefully nurtured by the never-ending Starfield and the Moke clan. However, these Sage Knights were not weak either, especially when it came to numbers. Therefore, as soon as the two sides clashed, the Wei Yang Guards and General Mo Ku of the Moke clan were suppressed. Seeing this, the Celestial Venerable smiled. He looked at Wei Yang Tian. "Attack!" As soon as he said that, a group of people suddenly charged down from the sky. There were not many people, only about 40 to 50. These people all charged down in groups. They were obviously the Sage Realm Mercenary Corps. And these people were all sages. At this moment, Sage Realm experts were walking around like dogs. Although there were so many sages this time, it did not mean that sages were cabbages. On the contrary, sages were still very rare in this starfield. There were so many of them here because the Keeper of Order had basically gathered all the sages here. If they were scattered, each starfield would at most have 10 to 20 sages. Below, Wei Yang Tian looked at Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai nodded slightly. Soon, he led Li Zhongfeng and the others into the sky, heading straight for the Mercenary Corps. The current head of the Moke clan, Mo Kuchi, also led a few Desolate clan experts and charged out. In the sky, the Celestial Venerable looked down and saw Mo Xia, Zhua Qing, and the others. However, he did not see Yi Xian. He frowned and scanned the area below. He still did not see Yi Xian. As if remembering something, the Celestial Venerable's expression changed. Yi Xian is gone. He's going to set us up. P.S. My gums have been inflamed recently. It's painful. End of this chapter. Chapter 489. As soon as the Heavenly Venerable finished speaking, 2 rays of sword light slashed through the mercenary group a few thousand meters away. It was extremely fast. Two of the Saint Realm experts didn't even have time to react before their heads flew into the air. At practically the exact same moment, another two heads flew into the air over 30 meters away. The Heavenly Exalt's face fell when he saw this, and he was about to make a move. However, Never-Ending Heaven suddenly made a move. Boom! An explosion resounded, and the Heavenly Venerable instantly retreated 300 meters. By the time he stopped, more than a dozen of the mercenaries had died. All of them had been instantly killed. Moreover, more were dying incessantly. The Heavenly Venerable turned to look at the starry sky. Attack! As soon as he finished speaking, an afterimage shot down from the sky. In the dark below, Yi Xian, who was about to launch an attack, frowned slightly. Then he stepped back. As soon as he stepped back, the space where he had been suddenly exploded. Yi Xian looked in front of him. A man in black had suddenly appeared there, and the man held a dagger in his hand. He could sense that the man in black was looking at him. The man in black was able to notice him. Right at this moment, the man in black suddenly disappeared. Yi Xian was just about to attack when Mo Xie suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, Mo Xie punched forward. Rumble. The man in black returned to where he was before. Mo Xie said, "Continue. I'll deal with him." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot lightly. Boom! Space trembled slightly, and he vanished on the spot. The man in black held the dagger tightly in his right hand, and his body gradually turned illusory. In the next moment, numerous afterimages flashed towards Mo Xie from all directions. Seeing this scene, Mo Xie narrowed his eyes. In the next moment, he suddenly slammed his palm in front of him. Rumble. The space within 100 meters suddenly shook violently. Immediately after, a powerful force spread outwards with Mo Xie at the center. At the same time, a black figure was forced back by this force. It was the man in black. The man in black suddenly stomped his right foot and used the power of space to stop himself. However, he just stopped when two swords appeared soundlessly. Hiss! The swords pierced through the man's head. Blood splattered everywhere. Mo Xie turned her head and looked around, but she didn't see Yi Xian. But right at this moment, a series of screams rang out incessantly from the mercenary group on the right. Instant kill. The group of mercenaries fighting with Mr. Bai and the others could be said to be frightened out of their wits at this moment because they did not discover who was secretly attacking them. The two flying swords were really too elusive. There was nowhere to hide. Soon, the group of mercenaries retreated as they fought. Not only did they have to face Mr. Bai and the other powerhouses, but they also had to guard against the people who attacked them from the shadows. The people who attacked them from the shadows took up too much of their energy. Many people already had thoughts of retreating. At this time, the Heavenly Venerate fighting Never-Ending Heaven suddenly looked up into the depths of the starry sky and roared, "What are you waiting for?" In the starry sky, a purple-robed old man looked down. The purple-robed old man was expressionless, and behind him was a dense black army. After a short moment, the purple-robed old man said softly, "Kill." With that, countless soldiers swooped down from the starry sky. Among this army there were human powerhouses, demonic beasts, and some oceanic species great demons. Their numbers were several times that of the Moke clan and Never-Ending Star Field. As he charged down, the sky darkened in an instant. In the sky below, Mo Xie looked up at the dense black army and said softly, "All members of the Moke clan, listen up. Fight to the last man." With that, he directly leaped onto the evil Qilin's back, and the next moment, he rode the evil Qilin and soared into the sky. Behind him were countless Moke clan powerhouses. Fight! Countless angry roars soared into the sky, shaking the horizon. On the other side, Shui Bai held a long spear in his hand and looked up at the horizon. The next moment, he pointed his spear at the horizon. Fight! With that, Shui Bai and Zhou Shengsheng soared into the sky, and behind them, countless never-ending star-field powerhouses followed closely. Fight! No one had the slightest bit of fear. They could only fight. In the starry sky, the purple-robed old man looked down. Among the mercenary groups, powerhouses were still being killed instantly. The purple-robed old man turned to look beside him. Can we restrain him? With that, 3 old men appeared beside the purple-robed old man. The 3 old men all wore grey robes and held black staffs in their hands. Divergent sorcerers. The 3 of them looked down. After a moment, the leading divergent sorcerer said softly, "Give us some time." The purple-robed old man nodded. Soon, the 3 divergent sorcerers began chanting incantations. Gradually, the space around them began to tremble. At the same time, 3 mysterious forces followed the space and spread downwards. The purple-robed old man looked down, his eyes searching for one person. That was the painter. But he hadn't seen this painter yet. This painter was as terrifying as Wei Yang Tian. After a moment of silence, the purple-robed old man suddenly said, "Attack." With that, 6 powerhouses appeared behind him. These 6 people were very different from humans. They were much taller than humans. Demon Lord. The 6 of them were all Creation Realm powerhouses, and they were all at the peak of the Creation Realm. In the next moment, the 6 of them charged downwards. Below, Wei Yang Tian suddenly looked up into the sky. When she saw the 6 of them, she frowned slightly. Who would stop them? At this moment, a woman appeared before the 6 of them. Painter. The painter stared coldly at the 6 of them. The 6 of them charged towards the painter. 6 against 1. In the starry sky, the purple-robed old man relaxed when he saw the painter appear. It was fine as long as the painter appeared. He turned to look at the 3 divergent sorcerers. At this moment, the leading divergent sorcerer suddenly made a seal downwards. Void seal, appear. As soon as the voice fell, the space below suddenly trembled violently. Yi Xian, who was in the dark, suddenly had a drastic change of expression. He hurriedly retreated, and the space he was retreating to suddenly ignited. After a moment, Yi Xian stopped. At this moment, in the space above his head, there was a black flame floating. That flame was right above his head. At this moment, although he was still in the space, that flame was following him. The current him was no different from not hiding at all. Yi Xian raised his head. In the sky, the 3 divergent sorcerers were watching him. Beside the 3 divergent sorcerers, the purple-robed old man suddenly said, "Kill him." The leading divergent sorcerer took out a black mirror and began to silently chant, "Heaven and Earth Mysterious Technique, Universe Reconstruction, Seal." With that, he pointed his finger at Yi Xian. Below, the space around Yi Xian suddenly froze and began to search layer by layer. Seeing this, the purple-robed old man's expression changed. "Don't use spatial techniques." As soon as he finished speaking, the space around Yi Xian went back to normal. Seeing this scene, the 3 of them immediately frowned. They looked at the purple-robed old man. The purple-robed old man said in a deep voice, "Spatial techniques are useless against this guy. Change to a secret technique." The leading old man nodded. He looked at Yi Xian and quickly made a gesture with both hands. In an instant, the space around Yi Xian began to heat up. In the starry sky, the divergent sorcerer formed a seal with both hands and silently chanted, "Heaven and Earth Mysterious Technique, for symbols Secret Technique, Absolute Blaze." As soon as he finished speaking, the space around Yi Xian suddenly ignited. Yi Xian slashed with his sword. Hiss! A ray of light flashed, but it was directly incinerated by the flames. At the same time, Yi Xian noticed that his body seemed to be on fire. Yi Xian frowned slightly. These geezers have some ability. He didn't dare be careless. The sword in his hand transformed into the sword of Moke. In the next moment, a powerful force converged towards his body like a tide. Moke energy. A short moment later, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot with his sword in hand. Hiss! A ray of light flashed, and everywhere it passed, it tore through everything. Even the flames were torn apart. After charging out of the flames, Yi Xian didn't deal with the three divergent sorcerers. Because he knew that he couldn't get close to them at such a distance. Moreover, there was a purple-robed old man by their side. So, he was very clearly aware that he couldn't get close to the three divergent sorcerers. So, his objective right now was to help Ague and the others deal with the Saint Realm Knights. Because Ague and the others were being steadily pushed back. The expression of the old man changed when he saw Yi Xian charge towards the Saint Realm Knights. His figure shook, and he shot through space to arrive in front of Yi Xian. After that, he suddenly clawed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian instantly felt a powerful force shrouding him as soon as the palm touched him. This force was so oppressive that he could hardly breathe. Yi Xian naturally didn't dare act carelessly when facing the old man, and he immediately took his sword in both hands and slashed it forward. A single strike of his sword was enhanced by two types of sword intent. Bang! As the sword slashed down, Yi Xian was instantly sent flying. However, the purple-robed old man in front of him was also forced to retreat over 100 feet. The old man glanced at his right hand. At this moment, his right arm had split apart like a spiderweb. The old man's face fell, and there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes as he gazed at Yi Xian. What sort of monstrous genius are you? At this moment, he was extremely astounded because he hadn't expected that he would actually be injured by a junior. That attack from Yi Xian had almost destroyed his entire arm. But Yi Xian wasn't even at the Saint Realm. He was too monstrous. The old man's eyes gradually turned icy cold as he gazed at Yi Xian, and he didn't conceal his killing intent at all. In the distance, Yi Xian could feel the murderous intent of the purple-robed elder. He gripped the Moke sword tightly in his right hand. Facing this purple-robed elder, he did not dare to be careless. One careless move could cost him his life. Right at this moment, the violet-robed old man suddenly vanished. In the distance, Yi Xian frowned slightly. In the next moment, he took a stride forward, and then he held his sword with both hands before he suddenly slashed down from above. Bang! As his sword slashed down, Yi Xian instantly felt a powerful force spread through his entire body, and then he was blasted flying. However, the purple-robed old man did not care about his arm that had been completely torn apart. He charged forward and punched Yi Xian, who was sent flying. If this punch landed, Yi Xian would definitely become a pile of mush. Chapter 490. Right when this fist was about to smash onto Yi Xian, a spear suddenly tore through the sky and arrived before him. Bang! The violet-robed old man retreated by over 30 m. The violet-robed old man raised his head to look over, and he saw a white-clothed woman that held a spear in her hand standing before Yi Xian. This person was precisely Enlancio. Enlancio held a spear in her hand as she just looked at the violet-robed old man without a trace of fear in her eyes. The violet-robed old man stared fixedly at Enlancio. Who are you? Enlancio didn't speak, and she just looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian wiped off the blood on the corners of his mouth. What are you doing here? Enlancio looked at Yi Xian. Am I not welcome? Yi Xian smiled and said, Of course I am. Enlancio was just about to say something when the violet-robed old man suddenly roared furiously. Die for the old man. As soon as his voice resounded, he pressed his left hand forward. With this press, an enormous energy palm suddenly flashed out from space, and it shot straight towards Yi Xian and Enlancio. Enlancio's wrist spun, and her spear stabbed out. Hiss! This spear directly stabbed onto the enormous energy palm. However, the formidable force of the attack really did force Enlancio to retreat repeatedly. But right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed his sword at the enormous energy palm. Bang! The enormous energy palm exploded into pieces. However, Yi Xian's expression changed instead because the violet-robed old man had already appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was just about to attack when Enlancio's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. Retreat! Yi Xian didn't hesitate to retreat, and he just retreated when a spear suddenly stabbed straight down towards the top of Yi Xian's head, and a strand of light flickered on the tip of the spear. The violet-robed old man's expression changed, and he didn't dare underestimate Yi Xian, and he smashed out with his left fist. Bang! Enlancio retreated over 30 m with her spear, but at practically the exact same moment, two flying swords appeared before the violet-robed old man and slashed straight at his throat. The violet-robed old man's pupils constricted slightly, and he hurriedly dodged backwards. However, he just stopped when Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. Soul Fixation Sword. Moreover, at this moment, Yi Xian was holding the soul-suppressing sword in his hand. Facing this purple-robed elder, Yi Xian did not dare to use soul separation or soul fixation from a distance, because the other party was too strong, and he did not have the slightest confidence. Thus, he chose close combat. The purple-robed old man had nowhere to hide. At this moment, the violet-robed old man had obviously sensed the uniqueness of this strike of Yi Xian's, and his expression instantly changed drastically. At this moment, he was utterly unable to dodge because this strike of Yi Xian's was too ingenious and had grasped the perfect timing. So, he could only choose to take it head-on. There was no other choice. The purple-robed old man roared angrily and punched out with his left hand. This punch could be said to contain the power of his entire life. The space in front of him directly collapsed. Yi Xian's sword fell. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion, Yi Xian was instantly sent flying. However, at the instant he was sent flying, his sword struck the purple-robed old man's arm. At this instant, the violet-robed old man was horrified. He didn't hesitate to detonate his body resolutely while his soul floated backwards. As he floated several thousand feet away. Enlancio was about to chase after them when the violet-robed elder suddenly roared, "Stop them!" Four black-clothed men appeared in front of the purple-robed old man. Enlancio did not attack again. Instead, she turned around and returned to Yi Xian's side. Fresh blood flowed endlessly from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. Enlancio lightly wiped the blood from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth, her expression gradually turning cold. Yi Xian stared into the distance. The purple-robed old man's soul was fading away, but a moment later, the purple-robed old man's soul began to fade. But after a short moment, the old man's soul returned to normal. He didn't die. Yi Xian's face sank. In the distance, the violet-robed old man raised his head to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, his eyes were filled with extreme fear. That sword strike from before had almost directly crushed him to death. If his soul wasn't sufficiently strong, he would have died already. The violet-robed old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian for a short moment, and then he turned around and returned to the starry sky. At this moment, he didn't dare fight Yi Xian and Enlancio anymore. He was a soul body now, and Yi Xian's sword and sword techniques clearly countered soul bodies. If he were to continue attacking now, he would have a slim chance of survival. After returning to the starry sky, the violet-robed old man said furiously, "Attack! Everyone attack!" As soon as his voice resounded, countless experts swooped down from the boundless starry sky. Many, a dense expanse of darkness. At this moment, the enforcers of order attacked with all their might, and they didn't hold back in the slightest. Below, Yi Xian raised his head to look at the dense expanse of darkness in the starry sky. His brows were knit together tightly, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Beside him, Anlanxiu said in a light voice, "Just do your best." Yi Xian nodded lightly, "Just do your best." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged into the sky with his sword in hand. Anlanxiu was behind Yi Xian. Yi Xian charged towards the group of saint-rank cavalrymen once more because Agui and the others were completely suppressed. If no one helped them, then Agui and the others would die. Along with the addition of Yi Xian and Anlanxiu, Agui and the others instantly felt much more at ease. Especially since Yi Xian's flying sword was helping them from the shadows, and it could be said to be a great help. Even these saint-rank cavalrymen were unable to resist Yi Xian's flying sword. That flying sword was too swift. It was swift to the point even saint-rank experts couldn't dodge it. Moreover, Anlanxiu's strength was extremely formidable as well, and she directly crushed saint-rank experts. Especially when Anlanxiu and Yi Xian cooperated together, they could practically instantly annihilate any saint-rank expert. For a time, Agui and the others started to gradually gain the upper hand. In the starry sky, the purple-robed old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian and Anlanxiu below. His gaze was like a sword, and it flickered with ghastly killing intent. Right at this moment, Yi Xian, who was killing, suddenly turned his head, and in the next moment, he directly vanished on the spot. Chi! A strand of sword light directly severed the head of an expert. And in front of this expert, a young man slowly fell from the sky. This person was War Army. At this moment, War Army only had one arm left. Yi Xian supported War Army. War Army's entire body was covered in scars, and his aura was growing weaker. When he saw Yi Xian, War Army grinned, and this grin instantly caused a copious amount of blood to gush out from his mouth. Yi Xian gently placed War Army on the ground. War Army looked up at the end of the horizon and softly said, "Brother Yi, I might have to leave first." Yi Xian shook his head, "There's still hope." With that said, he took out a pile of purple source crystals and placed them in War Army's arms. War Army gently shook his head, "The current me no longer has any combat strength. If I live, I will only be a burden to my brothers. To me, death is a kind of release." Yi Xian said angrily, "What the f*ck are you saying? What do you mean by you will only be a burden to your brothers if you live?" War Army softly said, "Brother Yi, let me die." Die. He naturally wanted to live, but at this moment, he was very clear that he would only be a burden to others if he lived. Because the current him no longer had any combat strength, and if these brothers around him came to protect him, they would be implicated by him. He wanted to live, but he didn't want to implicate these brothers around him even more. Yi Xian gently placing War Army on the ground, he held War Army's shoulders tightly with both hands. "Listen, live well, live for me." With that said, he suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Chi! In front of him, an expert was directly cut in half by his sword, but soon, more and more experts rushed towards him and War Army. Looking at those experts rushing over, Yi Xian's expression gradually became ferocious. When those people rushed in front of him, he suddenly waved his hands. Buzz! Two swords suddenly rang out, and then two swords suddenly flew out. For a moment, in front of Yi Xian, dozens of people's heads almost moved at the same time. But the next moment, more people rushed over. War Army looked at Yi Xian with a somewhat complicated expression. "Brother Yi," Yi Xian suddenly said angrily, "Shut up, hurry up and heal your wounds." With that said, he held his sword and slashed diagonally. A sword aura shot out, and in an instant, dozens of people on the right were directly killed. However, more and more experts appeared in the sky, and at that moment, whether it was the Moke clan or the never-ending Starfield, more and more people were dying. Never-ending Starfield's Moke clan was completely suppressed. At that moment, in the void in the sky, Moke clan's Wuxia suddenly turned around. Not far away, Zhuo Qing's chest was pierced by a sword, and one of the foreign experts slashed at Zhuo Qing's head. Zhuo Qing slowly closed his eyes. He was already exhausted. This was not a one-on-one fight, he had killed at least hundreds of experts by himself, and at that moment, he was really exhausted. Seeing Zhuo Qing's situation, Wuxia's expression changed drastically. He was about to help, but at that moment, dozens of experts directly surrounded him. Wuxia's expression instantly became ferocious. He pointed a finger at his chest, and a powerful aura swept out from his body. Rumble. The surrounding experts all retreated from the impact. Wuxia looked at Zhuo Qing's position. Zhuo Qing's head did not fly off, but was slowly dragged down by a sword. Wuxia turned his head to the right, where Yi Xian was. At that moment, Yi Xian was facing off against almost 100 experts by himself. Wuxia looked at the falling Zhuo Qing. Zhuo Qing glanced at Wuxia and smiled slightly. "I'll go first." With that, he looked at the countless experts rushing towards him. Moke clan. Fight to the death. With that, he placed his palm on his abdomen. Wuxia's expression changed drastically. No. He rushed towards Zhuo Qing, but a powerful force suddenly exploded from Zhuo Qing's body. Almost in an instant, almost 100 experts around him were directly turned into ashes. Seeing this scene, Wuxia was stunned. On the other side, Yi Xian was also stunned. After a moment of silence, Wuxia suddenly looked up at the sky. The next moment, he clenched his fists and smashed them in front of him. Rumble. With Wuxia as the center, the space within a few hundred meters suddenly shook violently and cracked. Powerful dark energy surged out from the surroundings. In an instant, countless screams rang out from the surroundings. Wuxia raised his head and roared, "All members of the Moke clan, listen to my order. Kill. At all costs." With that, he rushed into the sky. Wherever he passed, heads flew out one after another. On the other side, Yi Xian turned his head to look at War Army. War Army's right hand slowly clenched. Yi Xian said angrily, "Don't do stupid things." War Army said softly, "I don't want to drag you down." With that, he slammed his palm towards his abdomen. At the same time, a powerful force was gathering in his abdomen. Chapter 491. Self-destruct. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, and he suddenly slashed with his sword. Qi! A wave of sword gleams surged out, and the dozen people in front of Yi Xian were directly killed by this sword gleam. Meanwhile, Yi Xian turned and rushed toward the War Army. The War Army looked at Yi Xian in front of him and grinned. "Brother, take care." With that said, he slowly closed his eyes. At that moment, a hand suddenly pressed down on the War Army's shoulder. In an instant, the powerful force in the War Army's body was directly suppressed. The War Army opened his eyes. In front of him stood a black-robed man, and behind this black-robed man were 9 men in black robes. These 9 people's faces could not be seen clearly. The War Army was a little puzzled. "You are?" The reason why he was puzzled was because he had never seen these people before. The black-robed man did not answer the War Army. He turned to look at Yi Xian, and at that moment, Yi Xian was already in front of him. Yi Xian looked at the black-robed man. "You are?" The black-robed man said, "Young Master Yi, we are here to help you." As for anything else, we can't tell you for the time being. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "Thank you very much." The black-robed man looked up at the void in the sky and said softly, "Young Master Yi, are you willing to leave with us?" "Leave?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Leave?" The black-robed man nodded. "Young Master Yi, to be honest, this time, the Keeper of Order is serious. With the current strength of the Moke clan and the never-ending Star Sector, it is impossible to stop them." As he said that, he looked at Yi Xian. "You will only die in vain if you stay here." "Die?" Yi Xian turned to look at the sky, which was filled with a dense army. It could be said that the defeat of the never-ending Starfield and the Moke clan was only a matter of time. Yi Xian said softly, "I, Yi Xian, appreciate everyone's good intentions." The black-robed man said solemnly, "Young Master Yi, you have no chance of winning." Yi Xian said, "It's precisely because there's no chance of winning that I can't leave." As he spoke, he looked towards the sky and said in a light voice, "If others don't betray me, I won't betray them." The black-robed man sighed softly. In fact, he had already expected this. Yi Xian looked at the black-robed men and said, "Everyone, I don't know who you are, but please don't get involved in this matter." The black-robed man smiled and said, "We came here to help." With that, he waved his right hand. Behind the black-robed man, 9 people suddenly soared into the sky. 9 Sage Peak experts. Moreover, they weren't ordinary Sage Peak experts. They were very strong. Yi Xian looked at the black-robed man and the black-robed man smiled and said, "I know young Master Yi has questions. If we win, I will tell young Master Yi. If we lose, everything will be meaningless." Yi Xian nodded and said, "No matter what, thank you." The black-robed man said, "Let's talk later." With that, he turned and soared into the sky, directly rushing towards a rebirth realm expert. Yi Xian turned and looked at the War Army. War Army was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly grabbed him and brought him into the Great Wall of Burial Skies. Yi Xian placed the War Army on the ground and said, "Heal well. If we all die before you recover, you can self-destruct. If we don't die, then come out and help." With that, he turned and disappeared not far away. In the same place, the War Army was silent for a moment before he began to devour purple origin crystals. Heal. What he needed to do now was to quickly heal. Outside the Great Wall of Burial Skies, Yi Xian stood in the sky. At this moment, there were screams everywhere in the starry sky. People were dying at every moment. Although the black-robed man and the others had joined in, it was not very useful. At this time, a certain part of space suddenly exploded. A woman walked out. This person was precisely Master Painter. When he saw the painter, the purple-robed old man's face instantly darkened. The painter looked up at the starry sky and finally, her gaze landed on the purple-robed old man. The latter's expression instantly changed. At this moment, the painter suddenly disappeared and when she reappeared, she was already in the starry sky. The purple-robed old man was shocked. "Stop her." Dozens of experts directly rushed towards the painter. However, in less than a breath's time, these dozens of people had their heads removed. At the same time, the painter had already appeared in front of the purple-robed old man. Just as the painter was about to attack, an afterimage suddenly swept towards her. The painter frowned and raised her hand to press down. Boom! A wave of energy suddenly erupted from the painter's palm, but it was quickly extinguished. The painter was forced back nearly 100 steps. And at this time, in front of the purple-robed old man stood a middle-aged man. This middle-aged man wore a black overcoat and had a sheathed saber at his waist. The painter looked at the middle-aged man. The latter's right hand grasped the saber hilt. After a moment of silence, he suddenly drew the saber. Chi! A saber light erupted from the sheath, as dazzling as the sun. In the distance, the painter's jade-like hand gently pressed forward. The space in front of her palm began to rapidly condense. At this time, the saber light arrived. Bang! The space in front of the painter began to violently tremble. Then, cracks began to appear. In less than a breath of time, the space for 10,000 feet around the painter had cracked into a spiderweb. The painter's right hand suddenly clenched into a fist. She lightly pressed forward, "Break." As her words fell, bang! The space in front of the painter began to collapse inch by inch. A formidable strength spread out like a tsunami towards the blade-wielding man. Across from the painter, the blade-wielding man was expressionless. His eyes were closed, his right hand gripping the saber hilt. After a moment of silence, he stepped forward, his right hand drawing the saber and slashing down. His movements were completed in a single breath. Chi! A wisp of saber aura tore through the air. Chi! Wherever the saber aura passed, it tore through everything. Even the painter's strength was torn apart. The space in front of the two was like a piece of cloth, while the saber aura was like a sharp scissor. Soon, the saber aura tore through the space and arrived in front of the painter. The painter's hands came together. This closed in on the saber aura. After a moment of silence, the painter suddenly pressed down. The saber aura instantly disappeared. However, at this moment, a saber slashed down from the painter's head. The painter suddenly disappeared. Just like that, the two began to fight. Both sides could be said to be evenly matched. Below, Yi Xian looked up at the purple-robed elder in the starry sky. At this moment, the purple-robed elder was also looking at him. The purple-robed elder did not attack. All he had to do now was wait because they already had the upper hand. It was only a matter of time before the Moke clan and Never-Ending Star region were defeated. Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly looked at the distant Wuxia. At this moment, Wuxia was crazily slaughtering. Suddenly, Yi Xian said, "Wuxia, help me. I'll kill that old bastard." After saying that, he transformed into a sword aura and soared into the sky. 1,000 feet away, Wuxia, who was in the midst of a massacre, turned his head to look at Yi Xian's position. In the next moment, his body trembled, and he directly turned into a black shadow that chased after Yi Xian. His speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, "Help me stop the others." Wuxia did not speak. He only stared at the purple-robed elder in the starry sky. In the starry sky, seeing Yi Xian and Wuxia rush over, the purple-robed elder's expression instantly changed. He knew how terrifying Yi Xian and Wuxia were. Although they were both young, they were monstrous among monstrous geniuses. If the two of them worked together, killing a creation realm expert would be a very simple matter. The purple-robed elder hastily shouted, "Stop them! Stop them for me!" As soon as he finished speaking, countless strong people around dashed towards Yi Xian and Wuxia. More than a dozen of them were killed by the two flying swords before they could even get close to Yi Xian and Wuxia. When the rest of the people came into contact with Yi Xian and Wuxia's speed suddenly exploded. He directly rushed into the crowd and punched forward with both fists. Rumble. In the starry sky, an explosion sounded like a clap of thunder. More than a dozen experts were crushed on the spot. Meanwhile, Yi Xian relied on the two flying swords to forcefully rush in front of the purple-robed elder. However, at this moment, the purple-robed elder's mouth suddenly curled up. His smile was a little strange. Sensing this scene, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. At this moment, he could no longer hold back. He suddenly slashed down with his sword. The sword was the soul-suppressing sword. If this sword fell, at such a close distance, the purple-robed elder would definitely die. This was because the purple-robed elder was currently a soul body. Just as Yi Xian's sword was about to fall, a blurry shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. In the next moment, Yi Xian felt an aura of death. However, Yi Xian's expression was incomparably calm. That sword still fell down. Meanwhile, the blurry shadow retreated dozens of feet because a demonic beast had appeared beside Yi Xian. Second floor Great God. At this moment, the purple-robed elder was dumbfounded. He didn't expect that the shadow would suddenly retreat. Even if he wanted to retreat now, it was too late. Yi Xian's sword slashed down. Qi. The purple-robed elder's soul instantly became illusory. Behind the purple-robed elder, Yi Xian coldly said, "I'll let you laugh." As his voice fell, he slashed back with his sword. The purple-robed elder's soul instantly began to dissipate. In front of Yi Xian, the shadow stared at the second-floor Great God behind Yi Xian. "I think you must be the mysterious expert behind Yi Xian. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Chapter 492. The Second-Floor Guru. Yi Xian did not expect the second-floor guru to appear. Fortunately, the second-floor guru suddenly appeared. Otherwise, he would have been in trouble just now because the middle-aged man in front of him was far stronger than him, Yi Xian. The middle-aged man did not care about Yi Xian at this moment, but stared at the second-floor guru. In his opinion, the second-floor guru in front of him was the most dangerous person. The second-floor guru glanced around in silence. At this moment, 3 old men appeared around her. Yi Xian returned to the second-floor guru's side. The second-floor guru looked at the middle-aged man opposite her, who smiled and said, "How should I address you?" The second-floor guru suddenly disappeared. In the distance, the middle-aged man's expression changed dramatically. Bang! In the blink of an eye, the middle-aged man was sent flying thousands of feet away. However, at this moment, the 3 old men around the second-floor guru suddenly disappeared. The second-floor guru slapped out. Boom! With the second-floor guru as the center, the space within thousands of feet collapsed and was annihilated in an instant. In an instant, the space returned to normal, and the 3 old men had disappeared. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. He knew that the second-floor guru was strong, but he did not expect her to be this strong. That was an instant kill. As for the 3 experts just now, they were all Creation Realm experts, but they were instantly killed just like that. In the distance, the middle-aged man also had a solemn expression. Obviously, the second-floor guru's strength was beyond his expectations. The second-floor guru slowly walked toward the middle-aged man. "Such a weak person, how dare you covet this treasure? Don't you have any idea in your heart?" As her voice fell, she suddenly disappeared. Then, the space in front of the middle-aged man collapsed inch by inch. Seeing this scene, the middle-aged man's pupils shrank slightly. The next moment, he suddenly stomped his right foot, and his whole body shot out. Boom! Not far in front of Yi Xian, a loud noise suddenly rang out, and the surrounding space trembled. Then, Yi Xian saw a figure in the starry sky retreating rapidly. It was the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man retreated nearly thousands of feet away. Not only that, but one of his arms had disappeared. The middle-aged man raised his head to look at the god on the second floor. Just as he was about to speak, the god on the second floor suddenly disappeared. The middle-aged man's pupils shrank, and in the next moment, before he could react, his head was sent flying. At this time, second-floor god appeared behind the middle-aged man. At the side, Yi Xian was stunned. The strength of this second-floor guru, the great god on the second floor, raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. There, a voice suddenly sounded, "How should I address you?" As the voice faded, an old man appeared in front of the Almighty on the second floor. The old man wore a long robe embroidered with gold. His beard was very long, reaching his chest. The old man glanced at Yi Xian, then his eyes fell on the great god on the second floor. The old man basically knows all the experts in this star field, but I've never seen or heard of you. The great god on the second floor did not speak. She suddenly disappeared. Not far away, the old man expressionlessly pointed a finger. Rumble. The surrounding space trembled, and the great god on the second floor returned to her original position, but the next moment, she suddenly disappeared. With a tearing sound, the old man retreated hundreds of feet away. In front of the old man, the great god on the second floor slammed her claw down. This claw slashed down, and the space was directly torn and shattered like paper. In front of the great god on the second floor, the old man suddenly clenched his right hand. Retreat. Voice, this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. As he fell, a black vortex suddenly appeared in front of him. Boom! After the great god on the second floor's claw fell, she instantly retreated hundreds of feet away. At this time, the old man suddenly took a step forward, and a powerful force instantly enveloped the great god on the second floor, but the next moment, this force directly collapsed. Soon, the great god on the second floor appeared in front of the old man, and at the same time, a tearing sound suddenly rang. Rumble. With this deafening vibration, the old man had retreated hundreds of feet away, and as soon as he stopped, two flying swords suddenly appeared in front of him. These two swords were extremely fast, and the timing was even more perfect. However, as soon as the two flying swords appeared in front of the old man, they disappeared without a sound. In the distance, Yi Xian saw this scene, and his face immediately darkened. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Among the younger generation, you are indeed not bad. As he spoke, he looked at the great god on the second floor. Your strength also surprised the old man, but if you want to protect the never-ending galaxy, the Moke clan, and this Yi Xian, I'm afraid that is not enough. As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly waved his right hand. With this, the space around the great god on the second floor suddenly undulated like a wave. The great god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian. Retreat. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Xian immediately retreated thousands of feet away. As soon as he retreated, the space around the great god on the second floor shattered, and then a powerful force came from the starry sky. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly turned his head, and there, a figure slowly walked over. This person was Wei Yang Tian. And in Wei Yang Tian's hand was a bloody head. This head was the celestial venerable's head. We won. Yi Xian's heart relaxed. Wei Yang Tian walked to Yi Xian's side and looked at the distant great god on the second floor. Your friend? Yi Xian nodded. Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian. Do you still have friends like this? Call more of them. Yi Xian, Wei Yang Tian looked up into the distant starry sky, and gradually, her brows furrowed. Yi Xian said in a low voice, there are others? Wei Yang Tian nodded. Yi Xian looked into the starry sky. What are they waiting for? Wei Yang Tendo said, they probably won't wait any longer. As soon as Wei Yang Tian finished speaking, she walked into the starry sky. As if remembering something, she turned to look at Yi Xian. You are now the master of the never-ending galaxy. As soon as she finished speaking, she flashed towards the starry sky. Yi Xian knew that Wei Yang Tian had taken the initiative to look for the experts in the dark. A short moment later, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and transformed into a ray of light that shot down. It didn't take long for two flying swords to flash past incessantly. Instant kill. Yi Xian's two flying swords were so swift that even Sage Realm experts couldn't resist them. Yi Xian, Wuxia, and Anlanxiu could be said to be unstoppable. After the three of them joined forces, the situation actually turned around slightly. Especially Yi Xian's flying swords. They could be said to be specialized in killing the top experts, and these people were utterly unable to resist them. Yi Xian's group of three understood that Wei Yongtian and the second floor's experts were busy, so they had to kill them as quickly as possible. The more they killed, the better. Just like this, under the combined efforts of Yi Xian, Wuxia, and Enlanxiu, the battle situation gradually turned around. This was because the mercenaries and Saint Realm Knights were already fighting while retreating. They weren't afraid of people like Wuxia and Enlanxiu who fought head-on, but they were afraid of people like Yi Xian who attacked from the shadows. However, due to the huge difference in numbers, the never-ending Star Zone and the Moke clan were still suppressed. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Right at this moment, a rumbling sound suddenly resounded from the depths of the distant starry sky. Yi Xian looked up and saw a figure rapidly retreating in the starry sky, directly retreating to the sky above the Great Wall of Heaven Burial. This person was none other than Endless Heaven. Everyone's faces turned solemn when they saw this. In the starry sky, a huge human face quietly appeared. This face looked down, and in the next moment, a powerful force suddenly exploded in the starry sky. Rumble. The entire starry sky suddenly trembled violently as if it was on the verge of collapsing. Right at this moment, Master Painter, the great god on the second floor, and the hunchbacked old man from the Moke clan retreated repeatedly, and they retreated by almost 3 kilometers. On the other hand, the experts from the foreign territories and Sky River region had stopped fighting and retreated into the starry sky as well. The huge face looked down, and then its gaze stopped on the great god on the second floor in the end. A clone. A clone. The gazes of everyone in the surroundings shot towards the god on the second floor when they heard this, and their eyes carried a trace of shock. Even Yi Xian was slightly shocked at this moment. He hadn't expected that the great god on the second floor was actually just a clone. The great god on the second floor gazed at the huge face in the starry sky. Is there a problem? The face vanished silently and was replaced by an illusory middle-aged man. Countless people hurriedly bowed deeply to him when they saw this illusory middle-aged man. The Star Lord. The master of countless stellar regions and the master of the guardians of the starry sky. The Star Lord gazed at the great god on the second floor, and then he pressed his fingers together and pointed down. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. After a moment of silence, the great god on the second floor's figure instantly became illusory, and then she started to dissipate bit by bit. The great god on the second floor gazed at the Star Lord silently. Just like that, she gradually vanished until she vanished. Meanwhile, the Star Lord gazed at Wei Yongtian, Master Painter, and the others. Wei Yongtian's face was expressionless, and he didn't show any weakness as he met the Star Lord's gaze. The Star Lord spoke softly, "All of you aren't bad. Are you willing to follow me?" Follow. A wisp of ridicule curled up on the corners of Wei Yongtian's mouth when he heard the Star Lord, "Follow you?" The Star Lord shook his head. "Following me might be an opportunity for the three of you, an opportunity to rise to a higher level." Wei Yongtian looked the Star Lord in the eyes. "I'm sorry, but I don't have the habit of being someone's dog." The Star Lord nodded slightly. "I won't force it." As he spoke, he pressed his right hand down lightly. A powerful force smashed down towards Wei Yongtian and the others. Others couldn't sense this force, but only Wei Yongtian and the others could. When they felt this powerful force, Wei Yongtian and the others' expressions changed. What a terrifying force! Soon, the three of them were directly pressed down by this force, and before long, the ground below started to crumble and be annihilated inch by inch. In the starry sky, the middle-aged man's gaze landed on Yi Xian. He pressed his right hand down lightly, and with this pressure, Yi Xian's body was directly fixed in place. In the next moment, an illusory Xiao Ta quietly appeared between his brows. Yi Xian's entire body instantly stiffened. The other party wanted to forcibly pull out the prison pagoda. Yi Xian felt his divine soul disappearing bit by bit, and his consciousness was also gradually blurring. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from within Yi Xian's body, "Sorry, this is mine." As the voice faded, boom! The prison pagoda between Yi Xian's brows instantly returned to Yi Xian's body, and at the same time, footsteps sounded from the 5th floor. End of this chapter. Chapter 493. The 5th floor. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Is this guy coming out? In the field, everyone's eyes fell on Yi Xian. The Star Lord in the air also looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "It seems that you still have a backup plan." Yi Xian sneered, "I advise you to quickly kneel down and beg for mercy. Otherwise, you will die without a burial place." The Star Lord shook his head and chuckled, "Die without a burial place? You've made the biggest joke in the history of this star field." As he said, he looked at Yi Xian's abdomen, "Let him come out. Come out." Everyone was looking at Yi Xian. Under everyone's gaze, an illusory Xiao Ta suddenly appeared between Yi Xian's eyebrows. As this illusory Xiao Ta appeared, a man walked out from it. The man looked like he was only in his 30s. His long hair draped over his shoulders and there was a small emperor character between his eyebrows. His sleeves were very wide and his hands were hidden in the sleeves. His feet were bare and locked with a black shackle. Everyone was looking at the man. The great god on the 2nd floor who appeared beside Yi Xian also looked at Yi Xian. Her eyes were solemn, extremely solemn. The man looked up at the starry sky. He closed his eyes slightly and said greedily, "Fresh air, it turns out to be so wonderful. Sure enough, things that have not been lost will never be cherished." In the starry sky, the Star Lord looked down at the man. "Who are you?" "Who?" The man opened his eyes and looked at the Star Lord. He smiled and said, "Who?" As he said this, the smile on his face gradually widened. In the end, he laughed out loud, but there was a trace of desolation in his laughter. Yi Xian looked at the laughing man in the distance and asked the great god on the 2nd floor softly, "Is he very powerful?" The great god on the 2nd floor said softly, "Do you see the shackles on his feet? That was done by this pagoda in the past. To be able to make this broken pagoda do this, it already proves how powerful he is." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Now, he hoped that the man and the Star Lord would both be injured. To him, this was undoubtedly the best thing that could happen. The man in front of him and the Star Lord were too strong. In the distance, the man slowly walked towards the starry sky. "You're asking who I am? Let me tell you, I am Di Xing, Xing Emperor." The Star Lord frowned, "Never heard of it." Di Xing laughed, "You are so weak, how could you have heard of it?" In the starry skies, the Star Lord narrowed his eyes, "You are the most arrogant person this Lord has ever seen. I hope your strength is worthy of your arrogance." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pointed down with his finger, and then a strand of cold light shot down violently from the starry sky. This strand of cold light was like a shooting star, and it was soundless and didn't emanate any energy fluctuations. The expressions of Wei Yang Tian and the others turned solemn when they saw the cold light. Even the great god on the 2nd floor had a hint of surprise in his eyes. Surpassing heaven and earth, Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What do you mean?" The great god on the 2nd floor said in a deep voice, "This Star Lord has already touched the threshold of Tao. His strength has surpassed this world, and all the restrictions of this world are ineffective against him. Under such circumstances, to the people of this world, he is like a god, because he is outside the laws and isn't restricted by any laws of this world." Yi Xian looked up at Xing Emperor in the starry sky. At this moment, the strand of cold light had already reached the top of Xing Emperor's head. Under everyone's gaze, Xing Emperor gently waved his right hand. With this wave, that strand of cold light was like a cloud of green smoke, drifting away with the wind. Seeing this scene, the Star Lord in the starry sky narrowed his eyes, and there was an additional trace of seriousness in the depths of his eyes. When an expert made a move, it was obvious whether or not there was an expert. He knew that he had underestimated Xing Emperor in front of him. Below, Xing Emperor, this chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. He looked up at the Star Lord and shook his head, really low level. As soon as he finished speaking, he gently stomped his right foot. It was extremely calm. But in the next moment, the expressions of everyone here changed drastically. Because the figures of countless people in the starry sky had suddenly started to turn illusory. It could be said that besides the Star Lord, the figures of everyone by his side had started to turn illusory as well. Everyone here was dumbstruck when they witnessed this scene. Including the Star Lord. In next to no time, countless shrill cries resounded while many experts fled madly towards the depths of the starry sky. A few breaths of time later, the starry sky had become empty, and only the Star Lord remained. Meanwhile, Xing Emperor had arrived in front of the Star Lord. The Star Lord stared fixedly at Xing Emperor. Who exactly are you? Xing Emperor smiled, a person that's been forgotten by history. The Star Lord took a step forward, and then he clawed at Xing Emperor from afar. This clawing motion caused the space around Xing Emperor to collapse and be obliterated at an extremely swift speed. Everyone watched as the space around the exalted Emperor began to burn. Just like that, it continued for an unknown period of time before the ball of flames gradually dispersed, and Xing Emperor was still completely unharmed. The Star Lord's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. You. Impossible. Xing Emperor's eyes closed slowly. Weak. You're too weak. As he spoke, he glanced at the surroundings and spoke softly. This stellar region is too weak. Too weak. The Star Lord stared fixedly at Xing Emperor. Who exactly are you? Xing Emperor smiled. Xing Emperor. The Star Lord spoke fiercely. I've never heard of you. Xing Emperor chuckled. Then die. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure suddenly vanished. But in the next moment, he'd returned to where he stood just a moment ago. But at this moment, he held a bloody head in his hand. It was the Star Lord's head. Everyone here was stunned. He was instantly killed just like that. Yi Xian was stunned as well. How could such a formidable Star Lord be instantly killed just like that? The god on the second floor who stood by Yi Xian's side spoke softly. Do you understand now? The experts in the outside world aren't on the same level as the experts in here. Yi Xian was speechless. Xing Emperor glanced at the head in his hand, shook his head, and then squeezed it lightly. Bang! The head transformed into nothingness. Xing Emperor looked towards the depths of the starry sky. Is my main body coming over? Main body. This Star Lord wasn't his main body, but a clone. There was no response from the depths of the distant starry sky. Xing Emperor shook his head. It's boring. As he spoke, he turned around to look at Yi Xian and the others. To be more precise, his gaze had descended onto Yi Xian. In an instant, Xing Emperor appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian fell silent. Xing Emperor gazed at Yi Xian. This pagoda has trapped me for 67,000 years. 67,000 years. Do you know how it feels? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, it's quite uncomfortable. However, it doesn't seem to have much to do with me, right? Xing Emperor gazed at Yi Xian. You're the pagoda master. Yi Xian said, I'm not the one who trapped you here. If you want to take revenge, then you should look for the original owner of this pagoda. Xing Emperor shook his head. I can't defeat him. Yi Xian was speechless. Xing Emperor gazed at Yi Xian. This emperor doesn't want to waste time. I just want to ask, is the owner of the sword at the top of the pagoda here? The owner of the pagoda? Yi Xian fell silent. The plain-dressed woman was here? He didn't know either. This chapter isn't over. Please continue to the next page. If the plain-dressed woman didn't appear, then he would be dead for sure. At the thought of this, Yi Xian suddenly activated the World Prison Pagoda. However, the moment the World Prison Pagoda appeared, it returned to his body. Yi Xian looked at Xing Emperor. Xing Emperor shook his head. You want to risk your life? No, you're too weak. That's not right either. I should say that you're too young. As his voice fell, his right hand gently pressed down on Yi Xian. With this pressure, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At this moment, he truly felt the aura of death. He felt that his body was about to shatter. At this moment, Great God on the second floor pulled Yi Xian behind her. She clawed at Xing Emperor. Xing Emperor shook his head and casually waved. Boom! Great God on the second floor instantly flew out. Wherever she passed, the space was annihilated and turned pitch black. Moreover, the laws of this world couldn't repair the space. Xing Emperor's hand fell toward Yi Xian. Unending sky suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Xing Emperor shook his head. And, as his voice fell, he blasted out a punch. Unending sky's expression changed drastically. Her arms suddenly blocked in front of her. Boom! Unending sky was instantly sent flying. Thousands of feet away, Unending sky had just stopped when her arms shattered into nothingness. Xing Emperor glanced at Unending sky and said softly, "You can barely survive my attack. Unfortunately, in this emperor's eyes, you're still an ant." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Originally, I wanted to wait for the owner of the sword at the top of the pagoda. But now, it seems that he won't appear. As he said this, he shook his head. Unfortunately, it's a little less fun. After saying this, he glanced at everyone in front of him and said softly, "You guys are really weak. This is the first day I come out. I'll use you guys as a sacrifice to the heavens." As he said this, he waved his hands. In an instant, the entire never-ending starfield began to tremble violently. Countless places began to shatter inch by inch. He was going to destroy the entire never-ending starfield. Seeing this scene, the painter's expression changed. Her figure trembled as she charged toward Xing Emperor. However, before she could get close to him, she was sent flying by a powerful force. Even the hunchbacked elder from the Moke clan was the same. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed in front of Xing Emperor. Soul-suppressing sword. One sword soul-suppressing sword. As the sword fell, Xing Emperor suddenly stopped. However, he was completely fine because he had caught the soul-suppressing sword between two fingers. Yi Xian's face was filled with disbelief. "Your soul," Xing Emperor said softly, "the sword is barely passable. The sword technique is not bad. Unfortunately, you're too weak. This emperor's soul has long been immortal. How can a mere broken sword split it?" As he said this, his fingers trembled slightly. Boom! The soul-suppressing sword suddenly collapsed, turning into countless fragments that slowly fell from the sky. At this moment, a weak voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Young lord. Actually, you're not bad. Little soul doesn't regret following young lord. Take care." Yi Xian was petrified on the spot. Xing Emperor chuckled. "Are you in despair? This emperor likes to see your expressions of despair." As he said this, he was about to attack, but at this moment, buzz! A sword suddenly rang out from within Yi Xian's body. A sword suddenly flew out from the top of the tower. The sword soared into the sky and entered the starry sky. Then, it landed steadily in a hand. Everyone looked up into the sky. There stood a swordsman in a cloud-white robe. Xing Emperor turned to look at swordsman and chuckled. "Are you here? I hope you're not too weak. P.S. I want a prostitute. Ticket ticket. Seeking a prostitute." End of this chapter. Chapter 494. It's here. Everyone looked up. There, a swordsman stood quietly. He was looking at the sword in front of him with a smile in his eyes. Below, Almighty on the second floor was also looking at the swordsman. There was a trace of doubt in her eyes. Because she did not know this swordsman. However, she knew that this swordsman should be the owner of one of the 3 swords at the top of the tower. Emperor Xing walked towards the swordsman with a bright smile on his face. For a powerhouse, the most terrifying thing was that the opponent was not strong enough. In the air, the swordsman gently stroked the sword in front of him and said softly, "It's been many years." The sword trembled violently as if to express something. The swordsman chuckled and then looked at Emperor Xing, who was not far in front of him. The latter smiled and said, "What's your name?" The sword cultivator glanced at Di Xing. In the end, his gaze shot downwards, and it wasn't long before his gaze descended onto Yi Xian. He was slightly stunned when he saw Yi Xian, and then he said, "Young man, can you come forward?" Below, Yi Xian looked up at swordsman. After a moment of silence, he held the fragment of the sword soul and came in front of swordsman. The swordsman looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "So that's how it is." Saying that, he shook his head and chuckled, "Interesting." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Senior?" The swordsman looked at the pile of fragments in his hand. "Your sword?" Yi Xian nodded. The swordsman chuckled, "Although the sword is broken, there is still hope to restore it." Yi Xian quickly asked, "How to restore it?" The swordsman smiled and said, "Sword intent." "Sword intent?" Yi Xian was puzzled. How to restore the sword intent? The swordsman smiled slightly and did not speak. He looked at Emperor Xing in front of him. The latter smiled and said, "Are you done?" Swordsman looked at Dixing without saying anything. Di Xing chuckled. "I hope you aren't too weak. Otherwise, it would be too boring." Swordsman nodded. "Make your move." Emperor Xing's smile became increasingly brilliant. "You attack first." As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing, "I'm afraid that you won't have the chance to attack after I attack." Crazy. Everyone in the surroundings was looking at Di Xing. Needless to say, Di Xing's arrogance was boundless. However, it was undeniable that he had the strength to do so. In front of Emperor Xing, swordsman nodded slightly, "Then take my sword." Di Xing roared with laughter. "One sword? So what if there are 10 or 100 of them?" Swordsman shook his head. "I never use a second sword." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. This sword was very slow, very, very slow, just like a normal person's sword. In the eyes of outsiders, this sword was extremely ordinary to the point that there was nothing extraordinary about it. However, Di Xing's expression changed drastically. In the next moment, he pressed his palms together. Undying Avatar. As soon as he spoke, a powerful force swept out from his body. As soon as this force appeared, the space in an area of tens of thousands of kilometers actually started to seethe as if it could not endure this force. Not only that, but a golden light suddenly appeared around him, and this golden light directly enveloped him. As the sword slashed down, the force in front of Di Xing instantly dissipated into thin air. 2 breaths of time later, the surroundings returned to calm. Swordsman stood there with his sword sheathed. Moreover, the golden light around Di Xing had silently vanished as well. The surroundings were deathly silent. Everyone was looking at Swordsman and Di Xing. Who won? A short moment later, Di Xing's gaze suddenly became slightly dazed. No. Impossible. Di Xing, started practicing martial arts at the age of 6, attained godhood at the age of 10, comprehended the grand Taos of the world at the age of 19, and became an emperor at the age of 26. No, how could I not even be able to withstand a single sword strike from you? No, no. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they heard Di Xing lost. He lost to Swordsman. Swordsman looked at Yi Xian. The tower has acknowledged you as its master? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Swordsman spoke softly. This tower is extraordinary, and the person who created it is an extraordinary figure. It's a fortuitous encounter in your hands. You must grasp it well. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. This tower is very dangerous. Swordsman spoke softly. Indeed. The existence within the tower isn't something you can resist right now. As he spoke, he gazed at the sword in his hand. As if it understood Swordsman's intentions, the sword started to tremble lightly. Swordsman grinned, and then he tapped with his finger. The sword suddenly shot into the center of Yi Xian's forehead, and then it returned to the top of the tower. In an instant, the entire world prison pagoda shook violently, but it quickly returned to calm. Swordsman gazed at Yi Xian. Until next time. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure gradually became ethereal. A clone. Everyone here was petrified when they witnessed this scene. Even Yi Xian was petrified on the spot. He hadn't imagined that Swordsman would actually be a clone. It was just a clone. The second-floor expert by Yi Xian's side was astounded as well. As for Dixing, he had disbelief on his face, and he stared fixedly at Swordsman. You're just a clone. Swordsman gazed at Dixing. You aren't particularly weak. At the very least, you were barely able to hold on until now after receiving a strike of my sword. As soon as he finished speaking, he'd vanished completely. As for Dixing, he was stunned for a moment before his figure started to gradually become ethereal. All the others here were speechless. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Swordsman who still hadn't vanished. Have you seen that woman in a plain dress? Swordsman gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. No. Yi Xian fell silent. Swordsman said, Live well. Otherwise, no one can stop them once they go berserk. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, Them? Swordsman smiled but didn't say anything, and it didn't take long for him to vanish completely. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he stood on the spot, and he was completely bewildered. Right at this moment, Dixing suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression changed. This fellow wouldn't be thinking of dragging me down with him before he dies, right? Dixing gazed at Yi Xian. He just stared at Yi Xian, and it caused Yi Xian's scalp to go numb. A short while later, Dixing said, I have something that's on my mind. Yi Xian fell silent. He didn't say anything, but he was cursing in his heart. What does it have to do with me if you have something on your mind? But he didn't say anything. Because this fellow was clearly going to die. He didn't want to infuriate Dixing at this moment so as to avoid Dixing taking him down with him. Dixing seemed to know what Yi Xian was thinking, and he spoke indifferently, There are benefits. Benefits? Yi Xian still remained silent. Benefits were only benefits that could be seen and obtained. Things that couldn't be seen and obtained were just fleeting clouds. Dixing stared at Yi Xian. He opened his right hand, and there was a pitch-black spatial ring in his palm. The arch ring. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he asked, What is it? Dixing said, A precious treasure that contains an ultimate technique of mine. I don't want this ultimate technique to be lost. Besides that, this item is a symbol of status. If you have the chance to go to the Heavenly Star region in the future, this ring will be of great help to you. Yi Xian fell silent. Dixing said, there are 2 items from my collection in the spatial ring, as well as some small trinkets. Both of those items aren't inferior to your sword. Yi Xian said in a low voice, let's not talk about this for now. As he spoke, he took out the soul-suppressing sword fragment. If you can help me repair it, I'll agree to any of your conditions. Dixing glanced at Yi Xian, and then he said, it's best if you repair it yourself. Yi Xian's brows furrowed slightly. What do you mean? Dixing said, didn't that swordsman tell you just now? It'll be better if you repair this sword yourself. Yi Xian fell silent. Dixing said again, if you promise to do something for me, I'll do something for you before I die. Yi Xian looked at Dixing. What is it? Dixing said, I'll help you seal the 6th floor for a period of time. Yi Xian suddenly flew into a rage. What the F***ck? The 6th floor. Are you F***king done yet? At this moment, he was on the verge of collapse. 1 floor after another, who could stand it? Who could stand it? In any case, when he heard the 6th floor, he really couldn't stand it. Dixing was expressionless. Who are you blaming? Blame this tower. Hit it. Yi Xian, Dixing said indifferently, so, do you agree or not? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, what the hell is this 6th floor? Dixing shook his head. I don't know. Yi Xian's brows furrowed slightly. Dixing said, I originally wanted to go up and check it out, but unfortunately, I can't enter. I originally wanted to completely recover my strength and then force my way in to see those buildings above. I want to see what qualifications they have to be locked up above me. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched slightly. So this guy was concerned about this. That's right, the other party was on the 5th floor, and being locked up there meant that they were stronger than him. This guy was somewhat unconvinced. Dixing said softly, I want to see what's locked up there. If you agree to my conditions, I'll buy you some time. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, maybe, this 6th floor is easier to talk to? Dixing shook his head and chuckled. They'll definitely kill you. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Dixing said, if they want to enter the legendary 5th dimension, they must rely on this tower. Without this tower, they can't enter at all. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, 5th dimension? Why do you all want to enter the 5th dimension? Dixing looked at Yi Xian. You don't understand, but perhaps you will understand in the future. I don't have much time. Have you considered it? Yi Xian was silent. Dixing said, don't you want to know the strength of the 6th floor? Yi Xian nodded. What conditions do you have? Dixing smiled slightly. Go to the Emperor Xing star field and find a woman called Mu Qiuyan. Tell her that I'm very sorry about our agreement back then, Mu Qiuyan. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I'll remember it. Dixing looked up at the end of the horizon. His eyes were somewhat blank. Actually, I'm really stupid. 3 swords are standing at the top of the tower. This means that this tower looked for the 3 of them back then. Clearly, the 3 of them weren't locked up here. If I had kept a low profile, perhaps I wouldn't have died. As his voice fell, he suddenly turned into a white light and entered Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian hurriedly sank his mind into his body. The white light directly entered the 6th floor. After a moment of silence, Dixing's voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. It's not from the 4th dimension. He hadn't finished speaking when Di Xing's voice suddenly stopped, and then it completely vanished. Yi Xian was silent. Chapter 495. Not from the 4th dimension. Yi Xian did not speak for a long time. In the beginning, he subconsciously thought that the people in the tower were all from the fourth dimension, but now it seemed that this was not the case. If not from the fourth dimension, then they must be from the fifth dimension. Fifth dimension? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. The fifth floor had just been dealt with, and now there was the sixth floor. There was no end to it. At this time, Wei Yong Tian walked in front of Yi Xian. Are you all right? Yi Xian shook his head. I'm fine for now. Wei Yong Tian nodded slightly. Go and rest for a while. Yi Xian nodded, turned around and left. The battle ended. The Moke clan and unending Starfield people turned around and left. There were no cheers, no joy. Because too many people had died on both sides. Although they won this time, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Below, Mo Xia came to the ground and walked to the place where Zhuo Qing self-destructed. Looking at the ground, Mo Xia did not speak for a long time. At this time, the hunchbacked old man walked to Mo Xia's side and patted Mo Xia's shoulder lightly. He is a good person. Mo Xia looked up at the starry sky and said softly, Ancestor, our Moke clan should not be content with just one person. The hunchbacked old man looked at Mo Xia. What do you want to do? Mo Xia looked into the depths of the starry sky. Become stronger. Revenge. The hunchbacked old man was silent. Mo Xia said, Weak, I'm too weak. I need to become stronger, stronger than that Star Lord. No, stronger than him. Only by becoming stronger, our Moke clan will not be bullied by others, and no one will die tragically. After saying that, he turned around and left. The hunchbacked old man did not speak. On the other side, Yi Xian came to the city wall. As soon as he got on the city wall, the war army suddenly appeared in front of him and pulled him away. Soon, the war army brought Yi Xian to a stone house. In the stone house, Baldy was lying there quietly, without any signs of life. Yi Xian was stunned. War army's eyes were slightly red. An hour ago, he was seriously injured. I took him to the stone house. He didn't let me inform you. Yi Xian walked up to Baldy and looked at the motionless Baldy. He clenched his fists and remained silent for a long time. He had not known Baldy for long, but in his heart, he had always treated Baldy as a brother. Keeper of order. Yi Xian took a deep breath. Brother, rest in peace. You won't die in vain. No one will die in vain. Revenge. Yi Xian had already made a decision. Moreover, this matter made him realize that as long as the pagoda was in his body, there would be countless people coming to find trouble with him. In the face of such trouble, he no longer chose to sit still and wait for death. Instead, he was prepared to take the initiative to attack. A moment later, after Yi Xian and the war army buried Baldy, Yi Xian turned around and left. At this moment, the war army suddenly said, He died to save me. Yi Xian stopped. An iron-blooded man of the war army cried like a child at this moment, Damn it, I'm too stupid. I'm really too stupid. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Live well for him. After that, he disappeared into the distance. Body, this chapter is not over, please turn the page. After that, the war army knelt in front of Baldy's grave for a long time. Yi Xian did not return to the stone house. He came to a dense forest. As soon as he arrived, he sat down. Weak. The soul-suppressing sword was destroyed, which meant that his dantian was gone. At this time, he could not mobilize any strength. Because the sword was his dantian, his foundation. Of course, this did not mean that he was powerless now. After all, the realm and intent were still there. In the dense forest, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He spread his hands, and the fragments of the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his palm. Looking at the fragments of the soul-suppressing sword in his palm, Yi Xian whispered, "Little soul." There was no response. Yi Xian held the pile of fragments. Soon, two kinds of sword intents appeared around him. These two sword intents tightly wrapped around the soul-suppressing sword. Repair. He knew that swordsman and Emperor Xing would not lie to him. However, after an hour, the sword intents could not repair the soul-suppressing sword. It didn't work. Yi Xian frowned deeply. After a while, he started again. This time, he was not in a hurry and did it bit by bit. Sword intents. He used the sword intents to carefully feel the fragments of Little Soul. After about an hour, he finally felt a weak aura. When he felt this weak aura, Yi Xian almost jumped up in excitement. However, he still restrained himself and continued to use the sword intents to feel that weak aura. Soon, he began to use the sword intents as a line and then connected the fragments bit by bit. This was the method he had just thought of, and it was the only way. About 2 hours later, the soul-suppressing sword was reconnected by Yi Xian's sword intents. Yi Xian looked at the soul-suppressing sword in front of him nervously. Little soul? There was no response. Yi Xian's heart turned cold. Failed? At this moment, a weak voice sounded in front of him. Young master, Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Little soul." Little soul whispered, "Did young master use the sword intents to repair me?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes. How about you hurry up now?" Little soul said softly, "Very weak. I need to rest for a while." Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Good rest." Little soul said softly, "Young master, your sword intents are very useful to me. In the future, can young master give me some sword intents every day?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "No problem." Little soul said, "Thank you, young master. I'm going to rest." In the field, the stone in Yi Xian's heart finally fell. "It's good that you're fine." Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Not far away, Anlanxiu stood quietly. Yi Xian walked in front of Anlanxiu. Anlanxiu asked, "Are you all right?" Yi Xian smiled. "I'm fine." Anlanxiu said softly, "What's your next plan?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "I want to leave this place." Anlanxiu looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "If I don't leave, there will be many people coming here. That Star Lord definitely won't let this matter go. I don't want to implicate this place." He didn't forget that the Star Lord was still alive. Although the other side was completely annihilated, his intuition told him that the other side definitely wouldn't let this matter go. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Not willing to let this matter go. Moreover, even if the other side let this matter go, he wouldn't let it go. He, Yi Xian, was a vengeful person. If there was enmity, he would definitely avenge it. Anlanxiu raised her head to look at the starry sky. "Indeed, we should all go out and take a look." Yi Xian was stunned. "You want to go out too?" Anlanxiu looked at Yi Xian. "Can't I?" Yi Xian smiled. "Of course you can. We can go together." Anlanxiu nodded slightly, not saying anything. At this time, a black-robed man walked over from not far away. This person was the person that had come to help earlier. Yi Xian looked at the black-robed man. The black-robed man took off his black mask, and Yi Xian was instantly stunned. "It's you." The person before him was Lin Songyun. Lin Songyun walked over to Yi Xian and smiled. "Young friend Yi, I trust you've been well since we last met." Yi Xian bowed deeply. "Thank you for earlier." Lin Songyun smiled. "Young friend Yi is too polite." He hesitated for a moment as he spoke, and then he said, "Young friend, are you leaving this place?" Yi Xian nodded. Lin Songyun said, there's a place that I recommend you go. Yi Xian asked, where? Lin Songyun said in a low voice, Divine Martial City. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Divine Martial City? Lin Songyun nodded. Divine Martial City is one of the few places in this galaxy that the Star Lord can't interfere with. To be honest, the Star Lord might not give up. After all, the treasure in your possession is too precious. But now, he might not come in the open. At this time, Anlancio suddenly said, Divine Martial City is the place that the Valkyrie founded? Lin Songyun nodded. Yes, she's a legendary figure. He looked at Yi Xian. That place doesn't just have Wuyuan, it also has a sword sect. Young friend, you study the sword, so this place is really suitable for you. Sword sect? Yi Xian asked, a swordsman sect? Is it strong? Lin Songyun smiled. A place that even the Star Lord doesn't dare to provoke lightly. Do you think it's strong? Yi Xian looked at Anlancio, and the latter nodded. Yi Xian said, then let's go to Divine Martial City. At this time, the war army suddenly walked over. He stopped in front of Yi Xian and said in a low voice, Brother Yi, the Palace Lord is looking for you. Yi Xian nodded, then cupped his fists at Lin Songyun. Senior Lin, let's talk later. After saying that, he and the war army turned and left. Lin Songyun also left. Anlancio was about to leave when Lian Wanli suddenly appeared in front of her. Lian Wanli looked at Anlancio and smiled. Want to fight? Anlancio looked at Lian Wanli. You like him? Lian Wanli was stunned. Like him? Yi Xian? Anlancio nodded. Lian Wanli was about to speak when Anlancio said, You like him? There was a hint of provocation. Lian Wanli's eyebrows twitched. This king likes him. Anlancio was silent for a moment, then she asked, What do you like about him? Lian Wanli thought for a long time and said, I like him, can I? Anlancio. P.S. I want to ask for a prostitute, but I don't dare to say or ask. End of this chapter. Chapter 496. Yi Xian followed the war army to Endless Sky's stone house. Apart from Endless Sky, there was a woman inside. It was Painter. Endless Sky looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Painter suddenly said, Are you interested in ruling the never-ending starfield? Yi Xian froze and shook his head. Painter asked, Why? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. First, I like freedom. I don't like being bound. Second, I am not strong enough to make the factions of the never-ending starfield submit. Endless Sky suddenly said, What is the real reason? Yi Xian thought and said, I want to leave this place. Endless Sky frowned. Afraid of dragging us down? Yi Xian said, That treasure is with me, so they won't give up. If I stay here, I will only bring endless trouble to this place. Also, I want to go out and gain experience. Wei Yang Tian and the painter looked at each other. In the end, Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian. Have you decided? Yi Xian nodded. Endless Sky stood up and walked to Yi Xian. Where do you plan to go? Yi Xian said, Divine Martial City. Endless Sky nodded slightly. It is indeed a good place. It suits you. When are you leaving? Yi Xian smiled. In 2 days. I still have some small matters to settle. Endless Sky Tendo said, Go. Yi Xian cupped his fists and left the stone house. Inside the stone house, Endless Sky said softly, I told you long ago that he is not interested. The painter said, But if the two of us leave, this never-ending star zone, Endless Sky shook her head. With Mr. Bai around, there will be no chaos. Painter looked at Endless Sky. Where do you plan to go? Endless Sky walked to the door of the stone house and looked up at the starry sky. I have been guarding Neverending all these years and have never gone out to take a good look. Now, it is time to do so. Master Painter said with a smile, indeed, without anything holding you back, I believe you will become even stronger. Wei Yong Tian looked at the artist. What about you? Master Painter laughed. Shall we travel together? Wei Yong Tian pondered for a moment before replying, all right. At this moment, Painter seemed to have thought of something. She walked to Wei Yong Tian's side. Moke clan. Wei Yong Tian said softly, peaceful coexistence. The painter laughed and said, very good. After Yi Xian left the stone house, he went to find Dugu Xian. At this time, Yi Ling also came out of the prison pagoda, and the family of three reunited. Yi Xian started cooking, while Yi Ling helped from behind. He would occasionally cause trouble and was very happy. A smile also appeared on Dugu Xian's face as she looked at the elated Yi Ling and Yi Xian. The reunion of the family of three was something that she had never dared to imagine. Because at that time, she had already been prepared to die. A moment later, Yi Xian finished cooking. Yi Ling was about to eat, but Yi Xian looked at Dugu Xian. Mother, try it. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yi Ling blinked. Then, she picked up a piece of lean meat and put it in Dugu Xian's bowl. She giggled. Dugu Xian's heart warmed. She gently rubbed Yi Ling's little head and looked at Yi Xian. I heard that you want to leave the never-ending starfield. Yi Xian nodded. I want to take you with me. Yi Ling's eyes lit up and she said happily, okay. Dugu Xian was a little hesitant. Yi Xian looked at Dugu Xian. Mother, do you have any concerns? Dugu Xian nodded. Yi Xian put down his chopsticks and looked at Dugu Xian. After hesitating for a moment, she said, I want to take Ling, to Divine Martial City. Divine Martial City. Yi Xian was stunned. Then, he smiled and said, I want to go to Divine Martial City too. Dugu Xian looked at Yi Xian. You want to go to Divine Martial City too? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. I heard that there's a sword sect there. I want to go and learn from it. Then, he seemed to think of something and looked at Dugu Xian. Mother, why do you want to go to Divine Martial City? Dugu Xian hesitated and said, there might be news of your father there. Father. Yi Xian frowned slightly when he heard this word. Nearby, Yi Ling put down her chopsticks. The two siblings were very unfamiliar with this word. Dugu Xian said softly, he is not a heartless person. Yi Ling glanced at Yi Xian. It's fine as long as I have my brother. With that, she continued to eat. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then, he said, we will go together when the time comes. Dugu Xian nodded. Okay. After the meal, Yi Xian left the Great Wall of Burial Sky and went to the Moke clan. The Moke clan was familiar with Yi Xian now, so no one stopped him. On the mountain peak, Yi Xian met Mo Xia. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian. What's your plan? Yi Xian said, cultivate and take revenge. Mo Xia nodded. Count me in. Yi Xian turned and left. This time, he came for an answer. It was good to have a friend on the road to revenge. Yi Xian returned to his stone house and took out the storage ring given to him by Di Xing before he died. There were 2 items in the ring. One was a pair of dark gold arm guards. The arm guards seemed to be made of some animal skin. They were soft and comfortable to the touch. Yi Xian put on the arm guards. In an instant, he felt his arms tighten. Soon, a powerful force gathered on his arms. Not only that, but an illusory beast shadow suddenly appeared behind him. The beast shadow was shaped like a tiger. It had a pair of wings and was completely black. It was covered in dark scales and emitted an extremely violent aura. What kind of demonic beast was this? Yi Xian frowned. At this time, the Emperor Hound's voice suddenly sounded. It should be an ancient dark demon tiger. Yi Xian asked, Dark demon tiger? The Emperor Hound said, a very powerful demonic beast. Your arm guard has the soul of a dark demon tiger. Wearing this thing is equivalent to having the help of a dark demon tiger's soul. Your strength will increase by a lot. It's a good thing. Yi Xian nodded slightly. It was a good thing, so he naturally had to keep it. After putting away the arm guard, he looked at the second treasure. The second treasure was a model of a small boat. It was very small, only the size of a palm. Yi Xian was struck dumb at the sight of this thing. At this time, the Emperor Hound suddenly said, It's an Imperial starship. Yi Xian quickly asked, An Imperial starship? The Archhound said, Kid, this thing is even more precious than your arm guard. Even my god race only had one in the past because it has been lost. Now, I'm afraid it's even rarer. Yi Xian asked, What's the use of this? The Emperor Hound said in a deep voice, It's very useful. An ordinary starship crossing the starry sky is dangerous because there are many starry sky rocks and black holes. Especially when passing through some black holes, it is very likely that it will be swallowed up by the black hole. But this Imperial starship is different. It is extremely sturdy and fast. It is the only starship that can cross galaxies. Most importantly, this is a defensive treasure. If you had the Imperial starship and used it, those foreign Sky River star field experts wouldn't have been able to break in at all. Even the Swordmaster's clone wouldn't have been able to do anything to it. Yi Xian was a little shocked, It's so powerful? The Emperor Hound said in a deep voice, Boy, this thing is very, very precious. My god clan only had one in the past, and it's obviously not as good as yours. Yours should be a real Imperial starship. At this point, the Emperor Hound paused and said, You can go to the divine race now. Divine race? Yi Xian frowned slightly, Go to the divine race? The Emperor Hound said, Do me a favor. If there are still survivors of the divine race, they may not be in a particularly good situation now. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, Is it far? The Emperor Hound said, It was very far for you before, but now that you have this thing, you can directly pass through any black hole, so it's not far. Yi Xian nodded, Okay. To be honest, he also wanted to go to the divine race to see this once extremely powerful race. Of course, his real purpose was to see if there were any other treasures. In addition to the 2 treasures, Yi Xian also found 3 eggs. Very big eggs. Yi Xian took out the 3 eggs, a little puzzled, Brother Emperor Hound, what are these? The Emperor Hound said lightly, How would I know? Yi Xian, at this moment, Xiao Ling'er appeared in front of Yi Xian, holding 2 fruits in her hands. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Ling'er, and Xiao Ling'er walked to the 3 eggs. She carefully looked at the 3 eggs, then looked at Yi Xian, Give them to me. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, You're not going to eat them, are you? Xiao Ling'er gently tapped the 3 eggs, then smiled and said, I'll take them to raise, maybe they'll hatch a bird. Yi Xian, just like that, the 3 eggs were taken away by Xiao Ling'er. At this moment, the god on the 2nd floor suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian, I'm leaving. Yi Xian's smile gradually disappeared, Leaving here? The god on the 2nd floor nodded and said softly, I want to go back and have a look. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Where is your home? The god on the 2nd floor said, It's very far from here. Yi Xian asked again, Will you come back? The god on the 2nd floor looked at Yi Xian and nodded, Yes. In the future, I will need the help of your tower. Yi Xian smiled, As long as I'm not dead, it's totally fine. The god on the second floor looked up and said softly, that Di Xing entered the 6th floor before he died. If I'm not wrong, the 6th floor should have awakened. Moreover, the other party may not be from the 4th dimension, as for whether he's from the 5th dimension or not, anyway, you should know soon. Yi Xian was silent. The god on the 2nd floor looked at Yi Xian. Don't worry, before that swordsman left, he used his sword to suppress this tower again. The 6th floor should not be able to come out in a short time. However, you have to be prepared. It's best if you gather all the Dao laws as soon as possible. Also, study these Dao laws when you're free, especially the Dream Dao law on the 2nd floor. If you can subdue it, it'll be of great help to you. Yi Xian nodded, okay. The god on the 2nd floor glanced at Yi Xian. I hope the next time we meet, you'll still be alive. After saying that, she disappeared. Gone. In the prison tower, Yi Xian did not speak for a long time. The god on the 2nd floor also left. Dao laws. Yi Xian slowly clenched his fists. Facing this prison tower, he could not be passive anymore. He had to find Dao laws. The more Dao laws he had, the more he could counter the existence in this tower. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.